The clown that cannot be thrown away. This is a true story. My name is Mateo Ruiz, and I'm telling you this from a hotel room in Guadalajara, the only place where I feel safe anymore. 3 days ago, I buried this clown doll in Veracruz, 500 miles from here. This morning, it was lying on my bed. I never opened the door. No one has a key, but it's here, and I'm starting to think it never wanted me to escape. This is the story of the first time I encountered it, and the last time I tried to throw it away. October 2023, Mexico City. I was 26 years old, living alone in a cramped fourth-floor apartment in Condesa, one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city. The building had no elevator, just a dark hallway that smelled like mildew and old cooking oil that had been absorbed into the walls over decades. Every night climbing those stairs felt like descending into something that didn't want me there. The paint peeled in long strips from the ceiling and water stains spread across the walls like dark bruises. My apartment was small, just one bedroom, a kitchen barely large enough to turn around in, and a living room dominated by a sagging couch I'd found on the street. The fluorescent light in my living room flickered constantly, a nervous pulse that made shadows dance across the walls like living things. I told myself it was just faulty wiring. I told myself a lot of things back then that weren't true. I worked night shifts at an electronics repair shop in the industrial district, 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. It wasn't glamorous work, mostly replacing cracked phone screens and cleaning corrosion from water-damaged circuits, but it paid enough to keep me fed and housed. The shop owner, Don Miguel, was a gruff man in his 60s who rarely spoke beyond giving me instructions. I preferred it that way. Less conversation meant less lying about why I looked so tired all the time. I'd broken up with my girlfriend Carmen 3 months earlier. She said I was too distant, too wrapped up in my own head, that I never let her in. Maybe she was right. I spent most of my free time alone, walking through parks or sitting in cafes, watching other people live their lives. I didn't have many friends. The few I'd had from school had drifted away over the years, getting married, having children, moving to other cities. I didn't blame them. I wasn't good at maintaining connections. My family consisted of one person, my Aunt Rosa, who lived in Puebla, a 2-hour drive away. She was my mother's younger sister, the only relative who still spoke to me after my mother died when I was 12. The rest of the family had scattered after that. My father disappeared into alcoholism and eventually vanished altogether. My mother's other siblings moved to the United States. But Aunt Rosa stayed. She called me every Sunday, asked about my week, invited me to visit whenever I wanted. She was the kindest person I knew, though I never understood her obsession with those damn clowns. Sometimes, late at night in my apartment, I'd feel like someone was watching me from the window. I'd turn quickly, heart hammering, but there was never anyone there. Just the buses rumbling past on the avenue below, dogs barking in the distance. Neighbors arguing through thin walls. I blamed it on exhaustion. When you work nights and sleep during the day, your circadian rhythm gets scrambled. Your brain starts playing tricks on you. You see things that aren't there. At least that's what I told myself. Saturday, October 21st, 2:30 in the afternoon. I'd meant to take the metro to Centro Historico to look for a birthday gift for my aunt. Her 58th birthday was the following Saturday, and I'd been putting it off all week. But I was exhausted from back-to-back shifts and dozed off on the train. By the time I jolted awake, I was 3 stations past where I needed to be, all the way out in Pantitlan. I got off annoyed with myself and started walking back toward the city center. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and I was sweating through my shirt within minutes. That's when I decided to cut through La Lagunilla flea market, hoping to find some shade and maybe stumble across a gift. The market was in full swing. The air smelled like grilled meat and gasoline vendors shouting prices over cumbia music, blasting from cheap speakers that crackled with distortion. Blankets spread across the ground displayed everything you could imagine, pirated DVDs still in their plastic wrap, broken tools that someone swore still worked perfectly, ceramic saints with chipped faces, and faded paint clothing that smelled like other people's closets. Costume jewelry that turned your skin green. I wove through the crowd, dodging children running between stalls and old women pushing shopping carts filled with their purchases. Most of what I saw was junk, the kind of things people bought because they were cheap, not because they actually wanted them. I was about to give up when I saw the old man. He sat on an overturned milk crate beside a blue tarp spread with odds and ends. He must have been 70 years old, his face creased like old leather from decades in the sun, squinting at everyone who passed with suspicious, watery eyes. A hand-rolled cigarette dangled from his lips, and he wore a straw hat so old it was more holes than straw. Among the clutter of dusty books with broken spines and tarnished silverware that probably wasn't real silver at all, I noticed the clown. It sat propped against a stack of yellowed magazines, arms splayed out like it was waiting for an embrace. The body was made of faded red and blue satin, the kind that looked expensive once but had dulled over the years. It was stuffed with what looked like lumpy cotton that had settled unevenly, giving it an almost skeletal appearance in some places. The limbs were thin, nearly skeletal, with small brass bells sewn into the pointed tips of the hat and the curled toes of its shoes. But it was the head that caught my attention and wouldn't let go. Porcelain, heavy-looking, painted with a wide red smile that stretched too far across the face and rosy cheeks that looked like someone had slapped it. The glass eyes seemed wet refractive, like they'd just stopped crying or were about to start again. There was something in those eyes that made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't say exactly what. I picked it up, surprised by how heavy it was. The bells made a soft, tinkling sound, almost musical, like wind chimes on a distant porch. I turned it over in my hands, examining the craftsmanship. The satin was worn, but still intact, the stitching tight and even. Whoever made this had taken their time, had cared about the details. That's when I saw the second face. On the back of the porcelain head, painted in black and white instead of colors, was a mime. Pressed lips forming a thin line, hollow eyes that seemed to look into nothing, an expression of frozen sadness that didn't match the cheerful clown on the other side at all. It was like two completely different dolls had been merged into one, two opposing emotions, trapped in the same object. "Strange, isn't it?" the old man said, watching me with those watery eyes. He took a drag from his cigarette and exhaled smoke through his nose. Probably from the 80s, maybe earlier. Someone left it here this morning right before dawn. Didn't want it anymore, I guess. Can't say I blame them. Thing gives me the creeps. I felt a chill run down my spine despite the afternoon heat. "Why would anyone make a doll with two faces?" He shrugged, tapping ash onto the ground. "To save materials, maybe. Make two dolls in one. Smart if you think about it. Or maybe it's supposed to mean something. You know, happiness and sadness, laughter and tears, all that philosophical bullshit. People used to make things with meaning back then. Not like now when everything's just cheap plastic from China." I told myself that made sense. It was just a clever design choice, nothing more. But when I looked at the mime's face again, something in my chest tightened. The eyes, though painted and static, seemed to follow me as I tilted the head. An optical illusion, obviously. The curve of the porcelain and the placement of the pupils created the effect. Nothing supernatural about it. I thought about my Aunt Rosa. She'd been collecting clowns for 40 years, ever since she was a little girl. Her house was full of them porcelain figurines arranged on shelves like an audience fabric doll sitting in chairs, vintage circus posters covering the walls. Most people found it creepy, and honestly, I did too. But I knew the story behind it, the reason she surrounded herself with all those frozen smiles. When my aunt was 9 years old, her parents divorced. It was 1975 and divorce was still scandalous in Mexico, especially in small towns like the one where she grew up outside Puebla. Her father, trying to soften the blow of the separation, gave her a clown doll. He told her she'd won it at a fair they'd visited the week before, that she'd been so lucky. It was a lie, of course. He'd bought it specifically to distract her from the fact that her family was falling apart, that her mother was moving to Mexico City, and her father was staying behind, that she'd have to choose between them. She loved that doll, slept with it every night, carried it everywhere during the day. It became her comfort object, the one stable thing in a world that had suddenly become unstable. 3 days later, the doll disappeared. She searched everywhere, under beds and closets in the yard, even in the trash. She never found it. Years later, she'd learned that her mother had thrown it away, trying to erase any reminder of her father, any connection to the life they were leaving behind. It was a cruel thing to do to a child, but people do cruel things when they're hurting. From that day forward, every time something bad happened in her life, a breakup, a job loss, a friend's death, even just a particularly hard week, she bought a new clown. She called it her coping mechanism, her way of remembering that even in sadness there could be color and laughter. Over 40 years, the collection had grown to over 100 pieces. I never fully understood it, but I respected it. She was the kindest person I knew, and if clowns brought her comfort, who was I to judge this clown with its two faces showing both joy and sorrow? Felt perfect for her. The cheerful side and the sad side living together in the same object, inseparable. It was almost poetic in a dark sort of way. "How much?" I asked the old man. He squinted at me, then at the doll, then back at me. 300 pesos. It was more than I wanted to spend, but it was also perfect. I pulled the bills from my wallet and handed them over. He counted them twice, then nodded and tucked them into his shirt pocket. "It's yours," he said. "But if it comes back, don't blame me. Some things don't want to be owned." I laughed nervously. "What's that supposed to mean?" He just shrugged and turned his attention to another customer, dismissing me entirely. I tucked the doll into my backpack, padding it with a spare sweatshirt so the porcelain wouldn't crack, and started home. On the bus ride back to Condesa, I heard the bells jingling from inside the bag, even though I was sitting perfectly still and the bus wasn't moving that roughly. The sound was soft but persistent, like someone was gently shaking the doll inside the bag. I glanced down at my backpack wedged between my feet. It sat motionless. The jingling continued. Just the vibration from the engine, I thought. The bus's suspension was shot and we hit every pothole on the route. Nothing unusual about it. But the tinkling didn't stop. It followed me all the way home, through the entire 40-minute ride, a gentle ring, ring, ring that somehow cut through the noise of traffic and conversation. By the time I got off the bus, my nerves were on edge for reasons I couldn't explain. Sunday morning, I woke early and drove to Puebla in my aging sedan. The car was a 1998 Nissan Tsuru that coughed black smoke whenever I pushed it past 80 kilometers per hour and made alarming grinding noises when I braked. But it ran, which was all I needed. The clown sat in the passenger seat wrapped in a black plastic bag I'd tied shut. I'd placed it there instead of the trunk because I wanted to keep an eye on it. Which was ridiculous, obviously. It was just a doll. It couldn't do anything. About halfway to Puebla, somewhere on the highway between Texcoco and San Martin Texmelucan, I looked in the rearview mirror to check for traffic. For just a second, less than a second really, I could have sworn the bag moved. Not from the motion of the car. It moved on its own, like something inside had shifted position, like someone was adjusting their seat. My hands tightened on the wheel. My heart rate spiked. I blinked hard and looked again in the mirror. The bag sat perfectly still against the passenger seat. Just the light playing tricks, I told myself. The sun was coming through the windshield at an angle, creating shadows that moved as the car moved. Perfectly normal. Nothing to worry about. But I kept glancing at it for the rest of the drive, unable to shake the feeling that something in that bag was aware of me. My aunt's house stood on the edge of Puebla's suburbs. in a neighborhood that had been built in the 1960s and hadn't changed much since. The house was a modest, single-story building painted faded yellow, the color of old newspapers. The paint peeled in places, revealing older layers underneath blue, then pink, then white like geological strata, showing the house's history. The iron gate creaked when I pushed it open, and wind chimes made of seashells clattered softly in the breeze. My aunt had hung them years ago after reading that they brought good luck. I'd never had the heart to tell her they just attracted mosquitoes. I knocked on the wooden door. No answer. I tried the doorbell, pressing the button and hearing the muffled buzz inside. Still nothing. Then I remembered she'd mentioned going to the Sunday market that morning to buy fresh vegetables. She always left the door unlatched when she knew I was coming, trusting that the neighborhood was safe enough. It probably was. Most of the residents were elderly couples who had lived there for decades, who still left their doors unlocked and borrowed sugar from each other. I tested the handle. It turned easily. The door swung open with a slight creak. Inside, the smell hit me first, as it always did. Jasmine incense mixed with the faint mustiness of old porcelain and fabric that had sat undisturbed for years. The walls were covered with framed pictures of circus performers from the early 20th century, their painted smiles frozen in sepia tones and faded colors. Some of the frames were crooked, others had cracks in the glass that my aunt had never bothered to fix. And everywhere on every shelf, every table, every available surface, even hanging from the ceiling in some cases, clowns stared at me. 122 of them. I knew the exact number because my aunt counted them religiously, keeping a handwritten ledger where she recorded each acquisition, the date purchased, the price paid, where she'd bought it, and why. She'd shown me the ledger once. Some entries were simple. Bought at antique shop, $200 because I liked the colors. Others were more revealing. Bought after Miguel left me $450 because I needed something to hold. Porcelain clowns with delicate features and glass eyes that reflected light like real eyes. Fabric dolls with stitched grins and button noses. Vintage paintings of big-top performers in ornate frames. Plastic figurines from the 1970s. Modern art pieces from local craftsmen. Even the bathroom had a plastic shower curtain printed with grinning clown faces that had always made me uncomfortable when I visited. The living room felt especially oppressive. 47 porcelain figurines lined 3 long shelves mounted on the wall, arranged by height and color in a gradient that went from small and dark to large and bright. Their shadows stretched across the opposite wall in the warm yellow light from the lamp my aunt always left on, elongated and watchful, like a crowd of silent observers. The silence in the house was heavy, broken only by the ticking of a pendulum clock in the hallway. No traffic noise penetrated from outside, no neighbors' televisions or radios, just that steady tick-tick-tick marking time. I'd always felt like I was being observed in this house, like 100 pairs of eyes followed my every movement. As a child, it had terrified me. I'd refused to sleep over, had nightmares about the clowns climbing down from their shelves at night. As an adult, I'd learned to rationalize it. They were just objects, painted faces and glass eyes. They couldn't actually see anything. But the feeling never completely went away. I unwrapped the clown from my backpack, handling it carefully so the porcelain head wouldn't knock against anything. Up close, in better light, I could see more details. Tiny cracks in the glaze so fine they were almost invisible. A small chip on one of the bells, barely noticeable. Signs of age and use. I placed it on the middle shelf between 2 porcelain figures that appeared to be clapping. Their hands were frozen in mid-applause as if they were welcoming the new arrival. I turned the colorful clown face forward, hiding the mime side against the wall. It fit perfectly, blending in with the others as if it had always been there. As I stepped back to admire the arrangement, I could have sworn, and I know how this sounds, that all the other clowns leaned slightly toward the new one. Just a millimeter, barely perceptible, but enough to notice, like they were acknowledging it, welcoming it into their ranks. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes with the heels of my hands. When I looked again, everything was normal. The clowns stood exactly as they had before, motionless and static. I'm just tired, I thought. Too many night shifts in a row. My eyes are playing tricks on me. I need to get more sleep. I settled onto the couch to wait for my aunt pulling out my phone to scroll through social media. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. The clock ticked. The clowns watched. My aunt didn't return until 7 in the evening. She came through the door laden with canvas bags full of vegetables and fruit, apologizing profusely. "Mateo, I'm so sorry I ran into Senora Martinez at the market and she wouldn't stop talking. You know how she is. Once she starts, there's no escape. Have you been waiting long?" I helped her carry the bags to the kitchen. "Just a couple hours. It's fine, Tia." By the time we'd put away the groceries and she'd insisted on making me dinner, even though I said I wasn't hungry, I'd completely forgotten to mention the gift. We ate chicken and mole sauce that she'd prepared the day before, watching a telenovela on her small television, while she commented on how ridiculous the plot was, but admitted she couldn't stop watching. We talked about her work. She'd retired from nursing 2 years ago, but still volunteered at a clinic once a week. We talked about my job, though I downplayed how mind-numbing it was. We talked about nothing important the way family does when they're comfortable with each other. The clown sat on the shelf behind us, silent, and still surrounded by its new companions. That night I slept on her couch, as I always did when I visited. She'd offered the guest room, but the couch was closer to the door, and some part of me always felt like I needed a quick escape route from this house, though I'd never admit that to her. The living room was dim-lit only by the street lamp outside, filtering through thin curtains. Shadows moved across the walls as cars passed by, headlights sweeping through the room like searchlights. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to fall asleep. At 2:17 in the morning, I checked my phone to see the exact time I woke to the sound of bells. Soft, tinkling, rhythmic and deliberate. Ring, 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 with pauses in between like someone was shaking a small object with intention. I held my breath, listening. There was no wind. I could see the curtains hanging motionless. The windows were closed. My aunt always kept them closed at night because she worried about mosquitoes. The sound came from somewhere in the room, from the direction of the shelves. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding. The tinkling stopped the moment I moved, cutting off mid-ring like someone had grabbed the source to silence it. I waited, counting my heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, 20, 30. Silence. Nothing but the ticking of the clock in the hallway and the occasional car passing outside. Then as soon as I lay back down, the ringing started again. Ring, ring, ring. Same rhythm, same volume, coming from the same direction. I got up and turned on the lamp, flooding the room with sudden yellow light. The sound ceased immediately, like a switch had been flipped. I walked over to the shelves, scanning the rows of clowns. They all looked exactly as they had before, lifeless, frozen, harmless. Glass eyes reflecting the lamplight, painted smiles unchanging. The new clown I'd bought sat exactly where I'd placed it, bells hanging motionless from its hat and shoes. I reached out and gently flicked one of the bells with my finger. It made a soft ting, completely different from the sound I'd heard. Lighter, more metallic. Probably a mouse, I thought, trying to rationalize it. Old houses like this always have mice. One probably bumped into something, or maybe the house settling. Buildings make strange noises at night, especially old ones. Temperature changes cause wood and metal to expand and contract, creating sounds that seem impossible. I turned off the light and returned to the couch. The moment darkness fell again, the bells started. Ring, ring, ring. That same deliberate rhythm. I lay there, eyes open, listening to that maddening tinkling until the sky began to lighten around 5:30 a.m. The sound continued the entire time, stopping only when light from the approaching dawn started to filter through the curtains. I didn't sleep another minute that night. Monday evening, I was back in my apartment in Mexico City, trying to focus on work, but unable to shake the exhaustion. Don Miguel had noticed my bloodshot eyes and asked if I was sick. I'd lied and said I was fine, just hadn't slept well. My phone rang around 8 p.m. just as I was getting ready to leave for my shift. The caller ID showed my Aunt Rosa's number. "Mateo?" Her voice sounded strange when I answered, tight like she was holding back tears, like someone had punched all the air out of her lungs. I frowned, immediately alert. "Tia, what's wrong?" She was quiet for a long moment. I could hear her breathing ragged and uneven. Then, "Mateo, has anyone been in my house? Did you let anyone in while I was gone?" "No, of course not. Why? What happened?" Another long pause. I could hear her struggling to compose herself. Then the words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them back and couldn't contain them anymore. "Someone destroyed my collection, Mateo. I came home from the clinic this morning and found everything was broken. All of them. 122 clowns smashed to pieces. Porcelain heads cracked open. Fabric bodies torn apart. The stuffing pulled out and scattered everywhere. Some of them were burned, Mateo. Burned black. There's glass all over the floor. I can't even walk through the living room without shoes. It looks like someone went through with a hammer and just destroyed everything I've spent 40 years collecting." I felt my stomach drop. My mouth went dry. "Did you call the police?" "Yes, they came. They looked around, took some notes. They said it looks like a break-in, but Mateo, nothing else was touched. Not my jewelry, not my television, not the cash I keep in the kitchen drawer. They only destroyed the clowns. What kind of thief does that? What kind of person breaks into a house just to destroy an old woman's collection?" Her voice cracked on the last word. I could hear her starting to cry, trying to hold it back, but failing. "I'm so sorry, Tia. I'll come there right now. I'll help you clean up." No, you have work. I'll be fine. I needed to tell someone. The police think it was probably neighborhood kids, you know how they are. Breaking in as a prank or a dare. They said they see this kind of thing, sometimes teenagers getting destructive for no reason. But you said some were burned? That seems like more than just kids being stupid. I don't know, Mateo. I don't know anything anymore. I just know that my entire collection is gone. Everything. 40 years of memories destroyed in one night. She paused, and I heard her take a shaky breath. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "Well, not everything, all except one." My throat tightened. "Which one?" "The new one, the one with two faces. I didn't recognize it at first. I thought someone had left it behind by mistake. But then I looked closer, and I realized it's mine. I just don't remember buying it. Isn't that strange? I always remember where I get them. I write it down in my ledger. But this one, there's no entry for it. It's like it just appeared." I gripped the phone tighter. "Tia, I need to tell you something. I bought that clown last Saturday at La Lagunilla Market. I put it on your shelf as a surprise birthday gift. I'm sorry, I should have told you. This is my fault." Silence on the other end of the line. The kind of silence that feels heavy, oppressive, like the air before a thunderstorm. Then very quietly, "Where did you buy it?" "Mateo, exactly where?" "At the flea market." "From an old man selling used things on a tarp? Why does that matter?" Another long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was different, harder, almost fearful. "Was it new or used?" "Used. It looked old, from the 80s maybe. The man said someone had left it there that morning. Tia, what's going on? Why are you asking?" I heard her exhale slowly, a sound like resignation or defeat. "Mateo, I only buy new clowns. Always new. Never used. I have a rule about that. Old things carry something with them. Something from whoever owned them before. The previous owner's emotions, their experiences, sometimes I don't know how to explain it. Their essence, maybe. That's why I only buy new ones. They're clean. Untouched. Mine from the beginning. That's superstition, Tia. They're just objects. They can't carry anything." "Maybe," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. "But Mateo, I need you to take it away. Please, I don't want it in my house. Come get it. Today, if you can. I'll pay for your gas. Just get it out of here." "Tia, you're scaring me. It's just a doll. It can't have anything to do with what happened." "I know how it sounds, but please, Mateo, trust me on this. Just take it away." I told her I'd come the next day, that I couldn't leave work tonight, but I'd be there as soon as I could. She thanked me, her voice thick with relief, and hung up. I stood there holding my phone, staring at nothing, trying to process what she'd told me. The entire collection destroyed except for the one I'd brought, the one I'd placed on the shelf. Coincidence, I told myself. Bad timing. Maybe whoever broke in was interrupted before they could destroy it. Maybe they ran out of time. Maybe a neighbor heard noise and scared them off. But even as I thought it, I didn't believe it. Tuesday afternoon, I called in sick to work, the first time I'd ever done that, and drove to Puebla. The traffic was terrible, and what should have been a 2-hour drive took nearly 4. I spent the entire time thinking about what I'd find, my imagination conjuring progressively worse scenarios. When I finally pulled up to my aunt's house, I saw 6 large black garbage bags sitting by the door, heavy and bulging. They clinked with the sound of broken glass when I bumped into one accidentally. My aunt opened the door before I could knock. She looked older than I'd ever seen her. Her face was drawn, her eyes red from crying, her hands trembling slightly as she gestured for me to come inside. The living room was devastated. The shelves were completely empty except for thin layers of dust and scattered glass shards that caught the light like tiny diamonds. The carpet was stained in places with what looked like soot or ash. Bits of colorful fabric littered the floor, scraps of satin and cotton, remnants of the fabric dolls that had been torn apart. My aunt had tried to clean, I could see that. The larger pieces had been collected, the floor swept, but the destruction was still evident. It looked like a disaster zone, like something terrible had happened here. She gestured toward the middle shelf without saying anything. Her hand shook. There in the center of the otherwise empty expanse sat the clown, the only survivor, untouched, not a scratch on it, not even a speck of dust. While everything around it had been annihilated, smashed, burned, torn apart, this one doll remained absolutely perfect. The satin fabric looked freshly pressed. The porcelain head gleamed as if newly polished. The brass bells caught the light and sparkled. I walked over slowly and picked it up. The porcelain was cold against my palm, so cold it almost burned like touching ice with bare hands. The bells rang softly, that same gentle tinkling I'd heard in the night. I turned it around to look at the mime's face. The painted eyes seemed to stare back at me. And for just an instant, I swear this is true, I'm not making this up, I saw the mime's painted eyes blink. Not a trick of the light, not my imagination playing tricks. A deliberate, slow blink. The eyelids moved, closing and opening, the painted lashes merging together and separating again. I dropped the clown like it had electrocuted me. It hit the tile floor with a sharp crack that echoed through the empty room, and I was absolutely certain I'd broken it. Porcelain that old is fragile. A fall from that height should have shattered it. But when I bent down to pick it up, my hand still shaking, the porcelain head was completely unmarked. Not even a chip, not a crack. I checked it over and over, running my fingers across every millimeter of the surface, looking for damage. Flawless, perfect, like it had never fallen at all. My aunt watched from the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked small and frightened in a way I'd never seen before. "I'll get rid of it," I told her, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. "I promise, Tia. This was my fault. I brought this thing into your house. I'll fix it. I'll make this right." She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Thank you, mijo. I just want it gone. I don't care where you take it or what you do with it. Just please don't bring it back." I carried the clown to my car, wrapped once again in the same black plastic bag. As I drove away from my aunt's house, I kept glancing at the passenger seat. The bag sat there motionless and innocent-looking. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside it was aware of me, watching me, waiting to see what I would do next. That night alone in my apartment in Mexico City, I placed the bag in the corner of my living room as far from my bed as possible and tried to ignore it. The fluorescent light flickered more aggressively than usual, casting jagged shadows that seemed to reach toward the bag like grasping fingers. At 3 in the morning I heard the bells. Ring, ring, ring. That same deliberate rhythm I'd heard at my aunt's house. I got up, grabbed the bag without looking inside, and shoved it into my closet. I shut the door hard and piled shoes in front of it, as if that would somehow contain whatever was inside. The bells stopped immediately. The apartment fell silent. I went back to bed, pulled the covers over my head, and tried to convince myself this was all in my mind. Stress from work. Grief over my aunt's loss. My brain creating patterns where none existed, seeing significance in random events. But when I finally managed to fall asleep as the sun rose, I dreamed of 2 little girls standing in a carnival. They wore matching dresses and had the same smile. Each held an identical clown doll with 2 faces. They were crying, tears streaming down their cheeks. And the clowns, both of them, were smiling. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing, the dream still vivid in my mind. The morning light filtered through my window, washing away the worst of the fear. I told myself it was just a nightmare, nothing more. I told myself a lot of lies in those days. I threw that clown away 8 times over the next 5 months. Each time I thought I'd succeeded. Each time I was wrong. And every time it returned, something changed, not just in the clown, but in me. Wednesday night, 11 p.m. I couldn't keep the clown in my apartment another hour. Every time I looked at that black bag in the corner, my skin crawled. The fluorescent light had been flickering non-stop since I'd brought it home, and twice I'd found wet footprints on my bathroom floor, small child-sized prints that disappeared before I could photograph them or even really process what I was seeing. I stuffed the bag into my backpack, went down to my car, and drove to an industrial area 3 kilometers from my apartment. I knew the area from a previous job, a wasteland of closed factories and abandoned warehouses where nobody went after dark. The streetlights were broken, 2 out of every 3 bulbs dead or shot out, leaving pools of darkness between islands of sickly yellow light. The smell of rotting garbage hung thick in the air, and I could hear rats scurrying in the shadows. I found a large dumpster behind a closed mechanic's shop, rusted and overflowing with trash. I threw the bag inside, listening to it land with a soft thump among the other refuse. I stood there for a moment, listening to nothing. No bells, no movement, just the distant sound of traffic and my own ragged breathing. As I walked back to my car, my phone died. The screen went black even though I'd charged it to full battery just an hour earlier. I tried turning it on, holding the power button, trying different combinations. Nothing. Completely dead. The dashboard lights in my car flickered when I started the engine dimming and brightening in a rhythm that felt almost deliberate, almost like a heartbeat. Dim, bright, dim, bright. The radio turned on by itself, scanning through static before landing on a station playing children's music, then switched off again before I could touch the dial. Just a weak battery, I told myself as I drove home through the dark streets. I'll replace it tomorrow. The car's old, things malfunction. It happens. But I gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, and I didn't stop checking the rearview mirror the entire drive home. When I finally climbed the 4 flights of stairs to my apartment, the elevator was broken again. As it usually was, the hallway seemed longer than usual. The mildew smell was stronger, almost choking, and the ceiling light at the far end had gone out completely, leaving that section in total darkness. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and froze. The fluorescent light in my living room wasn't just flickering anymore. It was strobing rapid bursts of light and darkness that made the room look like a nightclub or a horror movie set. On, off, on, off, on, off, so fast it made my eyes hurt. I flipped the switch off and on, trying to stop it. The strobing continued, completely ignoring my input, as if the switch was disconnected from the light entirely. I grabbed a chair from the kitchen, stood on it, and unscrewed the bulb with shaking hands. The moment the bulb came loose, the room plunged into complete darkness. I screwed it back in partway, not enough to make contact, but enough to stay in the socket. The darkness remained. I sat on my couch in the pitch black, too exhausted to find a replacement bulb, too unnerved to go back outside to my car, where I kept spare supplies. I just sat there listening to the sounds of the city through my thin walls, telling myself everything was fine. Everything was not fine. Saturday morning, 7 a.m. I woke to someone pounding on my door so hard I thought they were trying to break it down. Disoriented and half asleep, I stumbled to the door and opened it. My neighbor from across the hall, Senora Mendoza, stood there in her bathrobe, her face flushed with anger. "Your alarm clock," she shouted. "It's been going off for 2 hours. Turn it off." I blinked at her, confused. "I don't have an alarm clock. Don't lie to me. I can hear it through the walls, that ringing over and over. It's driving me crazy. Senora, I swear I don't own an alarm clock. I use my phone." She glared at me, clearly not believing a word, then muttered something about inconsiderate young people and slammed back into her apartment. I stood there for a moment, processing. Then I heard it, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere in my apartment. Ring, 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 the bells. But I'd thrown the clown away. It was in a dumpster 3 kilometers from here. Unless I went to get the newspaper from my doorstep, something I did every morning, even though I rarely read it. The paper wasn't there. Instead, there was a black plastic bag tied at the top, sitting directly in front of my door. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. I didn't want to open it. I knew what was inside. But I untied the knot anyway, my fingers fumbling with the plastic. Inside was the clown, clean as if it had been freshly laundered. The satin fabric looked brighter somehow, the colors more vibrant. The porcelain head gleamed. And the mime's face was turned outward now, even though I specifically remembered placing the clown with the colorful side facing forward when I'd thrown it away. I'd checked my phone. I'd finally gotten it charged overnight. I opened the security camera app for our building's hallway. The building had installed cameras 6 months ago after a series of break-ins. I scrolled back through the footage. At 12:47 a.m., the hallway outside my apartment was completely empty. At 3:15 a.m., the black bag was sitting in front of my door. I watched the timestamp between those 2 times. Nothing. No one came up the stairs. No one got off the elevator. The hallway remained empty, frame after frame after frame, and then suddenly, between 1 second and the next, the bag appeared. 1 frame empty hallway. Next frame bag sitting in front of my door. No transition, no person, no explanation. I watched it 10 times, rewinding and playing in slow motion, looking for any sign of movement, any blur that might indicate someone moving too fast for the camera to catch. Nothing. The bag simply materialized. My stomach churned. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone. I sat down on my couch, the clown sitting on the cushion next to me, and tried to think rationally. Someone was playing a prank on me, had to be. Someone had hacked the security camera, deleted the footage of them placing the bag. Or maybe the camera had malfunctioned, skipped some frames. Technology wasn't perfect. There were glitches. This had to be a glitch. But even as I thought it, I didn't believe it. Sunday evening, 9:30 p.m., I decided to destroy it. If throwing it away didn't work, I'd burn it until nothing remained but ash. Fire destroys everything. Even if this thing had some kind of homing instinct, some way of finding its way back to me, it couldn't survive complete incineration. I carried the clown down to the small courtyard behind my apartment building, a concrete space surrounded by high walls where residents sometimes grilled meat on weekends. No one was there at this hour. The courtyard was lit by a single bulb hanging from a wire, casting harsh shadows. I'd bought a container of gasoline from a service station on the way home, the kind you use to fill generators. I placed the clown in the center of the concrete and doused it liberally, the fumes making my eyes water and my throat burn. I struck a match and dropped it from a safe distance. The flames erupted instantly, leaping up in a whoosh of heat that made me step back. The fire was intense, almost unnaturally hot. The fabric blackened and curled, the satin melting and dripping onto the concrete. The porcelain head cracked from the thermal stress, sharp pops like gunshots that echoed off the courtyard walls. The glass eyes melted, dripping down the face like tears made of liquid plastic, leaving dark trails in the white porcelain. The brass bells fell silent as the metal warped and deformed. I stood watching for over an hour, feeding the fire with cardboard boxes I found in the recycling bin and old newspapers I'd brought from my apartment. I watched until everything was reduced to charred fragments and gray-white ash, until nothing remained that looked even remotely like a doll. The smell was acrid and chemical, burning my throat even when I breathed through my shirt. It smelled like burning plastic and something else, something organic and wrong that I couldn't identify. When the fire finally died down, I stirred the ashes with a long stick, crushing any recognizable pieces into powder. I ground the fragments between my shoe and the concrete until nothing larger than a pebble remained. When I was satisfied that nothing could possibly be reconstructed from what was left, I scooped the remains into a new plastic bag. I'd learned not to reuse bags, and walked 6 blocks to throw it into a public trash bin on a busy street corner. As I walked back through the dark streets, I felt something behind me, not footsteps exactly, but a presence, a pressure at my back, like warm breath on my neck, like someone walking too close. I spun around 3 times during that 6-block walk. Each time, the street behind me was empty, just parked cars and closed storefronts, their windows dark and reflective. Yet the feeling persisted all the way home, intensifying with each step until I was practically running the last block. I spent the next 2 weeks in a state of cautious optimism. Every morning I checked my doorstep. Nothing. Every night I listened for bells. Silence. My phone held its charge normally. The fluorescent light in my apartment stopped flickering. I'd replaced the bulb and the new one worked perfectly. Maybe I'd done it. Maybe burning it had been the answer. Maybe I'd finally broken whatever curse or connection existed. 2 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon, I was at work repairing a cracked tablet screen when a delivery man came into the shop. He was short and stocky, maybe 50 years old, with a tired face and oil-stained uniform from one of the local courier services. "Package for Senor Ruiz," he said, holding out a cardboard box about the size of a shoebox. I frowned, setting down my tools. I didn't order anything. He checked his tablet, scrolling through the delivery information. No sender listed, but it's addressed to you at this location and it's been paid for. You want it or not? Who paid for it? Doesn't say. Cash payment, no return address. Look, you can refuse it if you want, but then I have to take it back to the depot and it'll sit there for 30 days before we dispose of it. Your choice. I signed for it, my hand moving automatically, even though my brain was screaming at me not to. The box was light, almost empty feeling, as if it contained nothing but air. I waited until my shift ended at 5 a.m., then opened it in the back room, away from the security cameras and Don Miguel's prying eyes. Inside, wrapped carefully in white tissue paper like a gift, was the clown. Perfect, completely unblemished. The satin fabric looked brand new, no scorch marks, no melted areas, no damage whatsoever. The porcelain head was smooth and intact, without even the hairline cracks I'd seen before burning it. Even the brass bells looked newly polished, gleaming in the fluorescent shop lights. But there was a smell, faint but unmistakable underneath the tissue paper. Smoke. The ghost of fire clung to it as if to remind me of what I'd tried to do, as if to mock my attempts at destruction. I checked the courtyard behind my building the next morning during daylight. The ashes from the fire were still there, undisturbed, a black stain on the concrete that hadn't been washed away by rain or swept up by the building maintenance. The evidence of the burning was right there, which meant this clown couldn't possibly be the same one. It couldn't be. It was physically impossible. Yet I knew with absolute certainty that it was. The same weight in my hands, the same cold porcelain against my palms, the same mime face staring up at me with those painted eyes that seemed too aware, too alive. Saturday morning, 10 a.m. I drove 2 hours northwest to Desierto de los Leones, a forested area in the mountains outside Mexico City. It's a national park, now protected land, but there are still remote areas where hikers rarely venture. I brought a military-grade shovel I'd bought from an Army surplus store, work gloves, and a high-powered LED flashlight. The plan was simple: bury it so deep that no one would ever find it. I'd seal it in a waterproof plastic bag, dig a hole at least 1.5 meters down, and cover it with rocks and compacted earth. The forest smelled like pine and damp earth, rich and loamy. It was cold for October, my breath misting in the air under the shade of the old trees. Owls called from the darkness between the trunks, their voices echoing strangely in the fog that clung to the ground. The sunlight filtering through the canopy was weak and greenish, making everything look slightly unreal. I found a spot far from any trail beneath a cluster of ancient pines whose roots had created a small clearing. I checked my phone's GPS to mark the location I wanted to be able to come back and verify it stayed buried, then started digging. The work was harder than I'd expected. The ground looked soft, but was actually packed hard with decades of accumulated pine needles and root systems. The shovel kept hitting rocks and thick roots that I had to cut through with a hatchet I'd brought. My shoulders ached. Sweat soaked through my shirt despite the cold. Blisters formed on my hands even through the gloves. But I kept digging, driven by something beyond mere determination. Desperation, maybe, or fear. Down and down, throwing earth over my shoulder, ignoring the burning in my muscles and the way my hands cramped around the shovel handle. After 2 hours of relentless digging, I stood in a hole up to my chest, deep enough that even if someone walked right over it, they'd never suspect anything was buried there. Deep enough that no animal could dig it up. Deep enough to hold it forever. I climbed out, retrieved the clown from where I'd left it wrapped in plastic near my car, and returned to the hole. This was it. The last time I'd ever touched this thing. I took the clown from the plastic bag for one final look, some morbid part of me needing to see the mime's face one more time. The mime's face gazed up at me, and then I saw something that made my blood freeze in my veins. The porcelain surface beneath the painted eyes was wet. Not condensation from the cold mountain air, not morning dew. Actual moisture, warm to the touch when I brushed my fingers against it, trickling down the curved porcelain cheek like tears, like someone crying. Porcelain doesn't cry. It's fired clay and glaze, inert and lifeless, a chemical process that creates an impermeable surface. It can't produce moisture. It can't weep. Yet my fingers came away damp. I touched my fingers to my tongue without thinking, an instinctive gesture to test what the liquid was. Salt. Tears. I dropped the clown into the hole like it had burned me, like it had burst into flames in my hands. It tumbled down, landing at the bottom with a soft thump against the dark earth. Quickly, frantically, my movements clumsy with panic, I started shoveling dirt back into the hole. The sound of soil hitting the plastic-wrapped clown was dull and final: thud, thud, thud. Each shovelful felt heavier than the last, like the earth itself was resisting, like I was doing something wrong. But I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. I buried it, packed the earth down hard with the flat of the shovel, jumped on it to compress it further. Then I scattered leaves and pine needles over the spot, arranged fallen branches in a natural-looking pattern, did everything I could to make the ground look undisturbed. When I was finished, you couldn't tell anything had been buried there unless you knew exactly where to look. I stood there for a moment, breathing hard, my entire body shaking from exertion and adrenaline. Then I pulled out my phone and marked the location on my GPS app. 19.3021 degrees, N99.3075 degrees W. Immediately after saving it, I deleted the marker. I didn't want to know where it was. I wanted to forget this place, forget this day, forget the feeling of warm tears on cold porcelain. As I drove back down the mountain road, my car died 3 times. The engine would just cut out without warning, leaving me coasting to the shoulder with the power steering gone and the brake pedal hard as rock. Each time I'd sit there in silence for a few minutes, my heart racing before trying to restart it. Each time it started on the first try as if nothing had been wrong. My phone's battery drained from 70% to 0 in under an hour, even though I wasn't using it, even though it was just sitting on the passenger seat. The screen went dark and wouldn't turn on no matter what I did. The flashlight I'd brought, a high-end model that claimed a 50-hour battery life, flickered and died. When I examined it later, I found that the bulb had shattered inside the casing, the glass pulverized into powder. I made it home just after 2 a.m., running on fumes and prayers, the car's dashboard lights blinking out completely just as I pulled into my building's parking garage. 3 weeks passed. I started to breathe again. Maybe it had worked. Maybe distance and depth had finally broken whatever connection existed. I went to work, came home, slept without nightmares. The fluorescent light in my apartment stayed steady. My phone held its charge. My car started reliably every morning. Life returned to something approaching normal. Then Wednesday night, 1:30 a.m. I was at the shop alone, working on a phone that had been dropped in a toilet. The shop was quiet except for the hum of the AC and the occasional car passing outside. Most of the lights were off to save electricity, leaving only my workbench illuminated. Someone knocked on the glass door. 3 sharp raps, loud enough to hear clearly. I looked up from the phone I was repairing. The shop's front door was glass from floor to ceiling, looking out onto a dark street. I could see the entire sidewalk from where I sat. There was no one there. I went back to work, telling myself I'd imagined it. Exhaustion playing tricks. I'd been working too many double shifts. The knock came again, harder this time. 3 deliberate raps that rattled the glass in its frame. I stood up and walked to the door, pressing my face against the glass to look up and down the street. Empty. Completely deserted. Even the late-night taco stand across the street had closed for the night. When I returned to my workbench, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. On the glass display case where we kept the repaired phones waiting for customer pickup, there was a handprint. Small, child-sized, the fingers short and delicate. But it was on the inside of the glass, as if someone or something had pressed against it from within the locked case, trying to get out. I grabbed rubbing alcohol and paper towels, wiping it away with shaking hands, telling myself it had been there all day and I just hadn't noticed. A customer's kid had touched the glass earlier. That was all. Nothing strange about it. But we hadn't had any customers with children that day, and the print had been on the inside. Thursday morning, I couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. I drove back to the forest, using my phone's history to retrace my route from weeks earlier. It took me an hour to find the approximate area, then another hour of searching on foot before I recognized the cluster of pines. I found the spot where I'd buried the clown. I could tell by the way the ground was slightly depressed, settling from where I'd disturbed it. The earth had been dug up, not by an animal. The hole was too precise, too deliberately excavated. The dirt was piled neatly to one side. The plastic bag I'd wrapped the clown in lay torn open on the ground, muddy and empty except for scraps of the white tissue paper that had been inside. The clown was gone. I stood there in the cold mountain air, staring at the empty hole, trying to process what I was seeing. Someone had found it. Someone had dug it up and taken it. But who? How? This was miles from any trail in a section of forest that saw maybe a handful of hikers per year. The odds of someone stumbling across this exact spot, recognizing that something was buried here and taking the time to excavate it, were astronomical, unless it hadn't been a person at all. That evening, my Aunt Rosa called. Her voice was flat, defeated, drained of all emotion. "Mateo," she said, "it came back." I closed my eyes, leaning my forehead against the cool glass of my apartment window. This morning, I found it on my doorstep when I went out to water my plants. I'll come get it. I'll take it away again. No. Her voice was firm, more certain than I'd heard it in weeks. I'm keeping it this time. Tia, you can't. It's dangerous. You saw what it did to your collection. Mateo, listen to me. I've been thinking about this a lot since everything was destroyed. The clown doesn't want to hurt anyone. It's just lonely, like me. We're both alone, Mateo. Both of us. Maybe we need each other. You don't understand what this thing is. It's not safe. I understand better than you think, she said softly. I'll be fine, mijo. Don't worry about your old aunt. I know what I'm doing. But I did worry. I worried all through the rest of the week, calling her every day, listening to her voice for signs of distress. She sounded tired but calm, reassuring me each time that everything was fine. Sunday afternoon, 1 p.m. I drove to Puebla without calling first. I needed to see with my own eyes that she was okay. I decided to try water. If Earth couldn't hold it, maybe drowning it would work. I drove to Lago de Guadalupe, a reservoir north of the city where people went boating on weekends. The water was murky green, fed by runoff from the mountains. And the park ranger told me the deepest part was about 15 meters. Perfect. I rented a small kayak, telling the attendant I wanted to do some fishing, even though I had no equipment. He didn't seem to care, taking my money and pointing me toward the dock. I'd prepared carefully this time. I'd bought a 10-kilogram block of concrete from a construction supply store and used nylon rope, the kind rated for 500 kilograms, to tie the clown to it. The knots were tight, triple-checked. This time the weight would drag it to the bottom and keep it there forever, buried under water and silt. I paddled out to the center of the reservoir where the water was deepest and darkest. The surface was calm, almost glassy, reflecting the cloudless sky. No other boats were visible. I was completely alone. I lowered the concrete block over the side of the kayak, holding the rope as the weight pulled the clown down. I watched it sink into the murky water, the white porcelain face fading from view as it descended into the green depths. Down it went meter after meter until I couldn't see it anymore, until the rope went slack in my hands as it hit bottom. I let go of the rope and watched it disappear beneath the surface. Then I heard the bells, rising from beneath the water, clear and distinct, impossibly loud for being 15 meters underwater. Ring, 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 echoing up through all that water and air, the sound waves carrying in ways that shouldn't be physically possible. The sound continued for 10 seconds, 12, 15, each ring as clear as if the clown were sitting right next to me in the boat. Then it stopped, abruptly cutting off mid-ring. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound. Absolute and oppressive, as if all the birds and insects around the lake had stopped moving, stopped breathing, stopped existing. As I paddled back to shore, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the paddle, my phone slipped from my pocket. I lunged for it, nearly capsizing the kayak, but it fell into the water with a soft plop and sank immediately. Gone. Just like that. Then one of the paddles cracked down the middle with a sharp snap, splintering like it had been struck by a hammer, even though nothing had touched it. The two halves hung together by a few wood fibers, useless. I had to paddle with just one oar moving in awkward circles, making painfully slow progress toward the shore. Halfway back, the sky opened up. Rain fell in sheets, cold and violent, instantly soaking me to the skin. Lightning cracked overhead so close I could smell ozone, the thunder deafening. The wind picked up, pushing the kayak sideways, waves that hadn't existed moments before, now sloshing over the sides. I abandoned the remaining paddle and started swimming, dragging the kayak behind me. The water was freezing my clothes, weighing me down. It took me 30 minutes to cover the last 100 meters, and I thought several times I might drown, might just slip under the surface and never come back up. I made it to shore, shivering and soaked, collapsing on the muddy bank, coughing up reservoir water. I made it home just before dawn, sick with a fever that would last 3 days. 1 month passed, the longest stretch yet. Nothing. Complete silence. I started to really believe that water had succeeded where earth and fire had failed. Maybe the clown was trapped at the bottom of that reservoir, held down by concrete and darkness, unable to return. Maybe it was finally over. Friday night, 3 a.m. I woke up because I heard bells in my living room. Soft ringing, Gentle, almost tender. Ring, ring, ring. I turned on the lamp beside my bed. The sound stopped immediately. I got up, walked to the living room, turned on every light in my apartment. Nothing. The room was empty. Everything exactly as I'd left it. On my coffee table there was a wet mark. Not spilled water. I hadn't had anything to drink before bed. A wet, rectangular impression exactly the size and shape of the clown's base. A circular mark where the body would sit with 4 small dots where the hands and feet would rest. And scattered around the wet mark I found what made my heart stop: small grains of dirt. Not the gray-brown soil from Mexico City. This dirt was different. Rust-colored, sandy, coastal soil. The kind of soil you'd find at the bottom of a reservoir. Saturday morning my aunt called. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Mateo, it's back." I already knew. When? Last night. I heard something at the door around 3 in the morning. When I looked out the window, I saw it sitting on my doorstep. I brought it inside. Why would you? It was soaking wet, Mateo, covered in algae and mud. It looked so pitiful, like a child left out in the rain. I couldn't leave it there. "Tia, please, let me come get it." "No, I told you I'm keeping it. We keep each other company now. It's not so bad, really. At night I talk to it and I feel less alone. Isn't that worth something?" "It's draining you. Can't you feel it?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Then, maybe. But loneliness drains you too. At least this way I have something." I wanted to argue, but what could I say? She was right. Loneliness was killing her slowly anyway. Maybe the clown was just speeding up the inevitable. That was the most terrifying thought of all. Saturday afternoon, 4 p.m. I decided to try one more time. The farthest I could possibly go. Vera Cruz, 500 miles from Mexico City, all the way to the Gulf Coast. I would bury it in consecrated ground in a cemetery where the dead kept watch, where prayers had been spoken for over a century. Surely there, surrounded by graves and hallowed earth, it would stay buried. I told myself this was different. This time would work. I told myself a lot of lies. I went to my aunt's house in Puebla to retrieve the clown. When I arrived, what I saw made my stomach turn. She'd lost weight at least 5 kilograms since I'd last seen her just 2 weeks ago. Her face was gaunt, sunken, the skin stretched tight over her cheekbones. Dark circles ringed her eyes so deep they looked like bruises. Her hands trembled constantly, even when she held them clasped together in her lap. She looked like she was dying. The clown sat on the center shelf in her living room, exactly where it had always been. But something about it had changed. The colors seemed more vibrant somehow, the satin fabric practically glowing in the afternoon light. The porcelain head gleamed with an almost wet sheen. The brass bells caught the light and sparkled like new. It looked healthier, stronger, more alive. While my aunt withered, the clown thrived. "Tia, please," I said, taking her thin hands in mine. "Let me take it away. Look at yourself. You're sick." She smiled weakly, pulling her hands free. "I'm just tired, Mateo. I'm getting old. This is what happens when you get old. You're 58, not 90. This isn't normal aging. That thing is doing something to you. Don't be dramatic. It's just a doll." But even as she said it, she glanced at the clown with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear, affection, resignation. Maybe all three. "If you won't let me get rid of it permanently, at least let me take it for a while. Give yourself time to rest, to recover." She hesitated, her eyes moving between me and the clown. Finally, she nodded. "Okay. But Mateo, promise me you'll be careful with it. I know how this sounds, but it doesn't like being abandoned. When you throw it away, when you try to destroy it, I think it gets angry. Maybe if you're gentler, if you explain what you're doing." "You want me to talk to it?" "I know it sounds crazy, but yes, talk to it. Tell it you're not abandoning it. Tell it you'll bring it back. Maybe that will help." I wanted to argue, to tell her she was losing her grip on reality, but looking at her exhausted, desperate face, I couldn't bring myself to do it. "Okay, Tia, I'll talk to it." When I picked up the clown to place it in my backpack, it was heavier than I remembered. The porcelain felt warm, almost feverish, like it had been sitting in direct sunlight, even though it had been in shadow. The warmth spread through my hands up my arms, making my skin prickle. That's when I saw the note, a small piece of paper folded into quarters tucked into the side pocket of my backpack. I didn't remember putting anything there. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was shaky, barely legible, written in pencil that had been pressed so hard it nearly tore through the paper. Por favor no me dejes sola otra vez. Please don't leave me alone again. I hadn't written this. The handwriting wasn't mine, wasn't my aunt's. The letters were formed like a child would write them, uneven and uncertain. I looked at the clown in my hands. The mime face stared up at me with those painted eyes that seemed to see everything. "I'm not abandoning you," I whispered, feeling ridiculous even as I said it. "I'm just taking you somewhere safe, somewhere you can rest." The clown, of course, said nothing. It was just a doll, just porcelain and fabric and brass bells. I told myself that all the way to the bus station. The bus ride to Veracruz took 10 hours through the night. I'd bought the cheapest ticket I could find, a second-class bus that stopped at every small town between Mexico City and the coast, picking up and dropping off passengers in places that barely appeared on maps. The interior smelled like diesel fuel and worn leather that had absorbed decades of sweat. The seats were cracked vinyl that stuck to your skin. The air conditioning rattled and wheezed but barely cooled the stale air. I took a window seat near the back, as far from other passengers as possible. The backpack with the clown sat on my lap. I didn't trust putting it in the overhead compartment. I needed to know where it was, at all times needed to feel its weight, its presence. As the city lights faded behind us and we entered the darkness of rural highways, I tried to sleep. My head rested against the vibrating window, my arms wrapped around the backpack. The other passengers were already snoring, a fat man across the aisle whose mouth hung open, an old woman clutching a chicken in a wire cage that clucked softly, a teenage couple sharing earbuds and whispering to each other. At 2:15 a.m., the bus pulled into a rest stop. Flickering sodium lights illuminated a small parking lot with a 24-hour cafe that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the 1980s, and restrooms that probably hadn't been cleaned ever. Most passengers stayed on the bus, but I needed coffee, needed to stay awake. The nightmares that came when I closed my eyes were getting worse, always the same dream of two little girls crying in a carnival, their clown dolls smiling, while tears ran down the children's faces. I bought burnt coffee in a styrofoam cup from a bored teenager behind a grease-stained counter and stood outside in the parking lot stretching my legs. The night air was warm and humid, heavy with the smell of diesel and fried food. Through the cafe's dirty window I could see the bus in the parking lot, row after row of seats, most occupied by sleeping passengers. And there in my seat, the seat I'd just vacated, I saw a small silhouette, a shape too small to be human, sitting exactly where I'd been. It was perfectly still, facing forward like a child waiting patiently for the bus to start moving again. My coffee cup fell from my hand, splashing hot liquid across my shoes. I didn't notice. I ran my legs moving before my brain caught up, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. When I reached the bus and climbed back on my breath coming in gasps, my seat was empty. Just my backpack where I'd left it sitting innocuously on the worn vinyl. I unzipped it with shaking hands, my fingers fumbling with the zipper. The clown was inside exactly as I'd packed it, wrapped in an old t-shirt to protect the porcelain. But it was warmer now, not just warm hot. The porcelain head felt feverish through the fabric, like it had been sitting in an oven. I touched it with my fingertips and jerked back. It was almost too hot to touch. We were in the middle of the night. There was no sun. There was no heat source. Yet the doll burned with internal warmth, radiating heat like a living thing with a fever. I rewrapped it quickly, zipped the backpack, and sat clutching it to my chest for the rest of the journey. Every time I started to doze off, I'd jolt awake, convinced I'd felt the backpack move in my arms, convinced I'd heard soft breathing that wasn't my own. The rest of the journey passed in a haze of exhaustion and paranoia. I didn't sleep another minute. We arrived in Veracruz at 9:30 a.m. The coastal city sprawled before us as the bus descended from the mountains, white buildings and palm trees shimmering in the brutal morning heat. The air tasted like salt and fish, thick and humid in a way that made my clothes stick to my skin immediately. Seagulls screamed overhead, circling in the cloudless sky, their cries harsh and mocking. The humidity wrapped around me like a wet blanket, making it hard to breathe. This was nothing like the dry heat of Mexico City. This was oppressive, suffocating, the kind of heat that makes you understand why coastal towns shut down for siesta. I rented a car with the last of my savings, a tiny Chevy that smelled like the last renter had been chain-smoking, and drove 2 hours north along the coast to Nautla, a small fishing village I'd found on a map during my research. The roads became narrower as I left the city, the towns smaller and more spread out. By the time I reached Nautla, it felt like I'd traveled back 50 years. Pastel-colored houses with peeling paint-lined unpaved streets. Stray dogs slept in whatever shade they could find, too hot to even lift their heads as I drove past. Old men played dominoes under a corrugated metal awning, their movements slow and deliberate, conserving energy in the heat. A woman sold fruit from a wooden cart, the produce already starting to wilt in the sun. I stopped to ask her directions to the cemetery Panteon Municipal. She looked at me with suspicious eyes, taking in my city clothes and pale skin. "Para que quieres ir a la joven?" "Why do you want to go there, young man?" "I need to visit a family member." The lie came easily. She studied me for a long moment, then pointed with a gnarled finger up a hill. "There." "But why do you want to go there? It's not a good place for visitors, especially not city people." "Why not?" She just shook her head and turned back to her fruit, dismissing me. "Just be careful. The dead there are old and forgotten. They don't like being disturbed." I drove up a winding dirt road, the car bouncing over potholes and loose rocks until I found it. The cemetery sat on a slope overlooking the ocean, surrounded by a low wall painted turquoise that had faded to almost white in the sun. The iron gate hung crooked on its hinges, one side dragging in the dirt. Inside, crumbling tombs and crosses tilted at angles like drunken soldiers overtaken by weeds and vines. Some graves looked ancient headstones from the 1800s, the inscriptions worn smooth by decades of salt wind and rain. Others were more recent but equally neglected plastic flowers, faded to colorless ghosts of their former selves. The smell hit me as soon as I stepped through the gate. Not decay exactly, there was nothing fresh enough to rot. This was the smell of age itself, damp earth and old flowers and stone that had baked in the sun for 100 years, absorbing the heat during the day and releasing it at night. It should have been peaceful, this place where the dead rested overlooking the sea. Instead, it felt watchful, waiting. The trees inside the cemetery twisted things I couldn't identify. Nothing like the pines around Mexico City cast spotted shadows across the pathways. Their branches moved in a breeze I couldn't feel, creating patterns of light and dark that seemed almost deliberate. An old man emerged from a small stone building near the entrance, moving with the careful steps of someone whose bones ached. He must have been 70, maybe older, his face like cracked leather from a lifetime in the coastal sun. His eyes were clouded with cataracts, giving them a milky, unseeing quality. He held a shovel like a walking stick, leaning on it heavily. "Busca a alguien. Are you looking for someone? I need to bury something," I said, then quickly added, "something personal, something that needs to rest." He studied me for a long moment with those clouded eyes. I had the uncomfortable feeling he could see more than I wanted him to. "What are you burying?" "Just something that needs to stay buried." He nodded slowly as if this made perfect sense. "There's a section in the back, old graves. Nobody visits them anymore. Nobody remembers who they were. You can dig there if you must, but Signor—" He paused, his rheumy eyes fixing on my backpack. "Whatever you're putting in the ground, make sure you want it to stay there. This soil doesn't give up its dead easily. Once something is buried here, it becomes part of this place, part of the old earth. Do you understand?" "I understand." "No," he said softly, "I don't think you do, but you will." He pointed with his shovel toward the back of the cemetery, then turned and shuffled back into his stone building, dismissing me entirely. I found the section he'd indicated. The graves here were indeed ancient headstones from the mid-1800s, most so weathered that the names were illegible. Weeds grew thick between the tombs, some as tall as my waist. No fresh flowers, no signs that anyone had visited in years, maybe decades. These people had been forgotten by everyone who'd ever known them. Their children were dead, their grandchildren were dead, maybe even their great-grandchildren. They existed now only as names on crumbling stone, and soon even those names would be worn away by wind and rain and time. Perfect. I chose a spot beside a nameless grave. The headstone read only 1,943 to 1,967 inches, with no other information. 24 years old when they died. No name, no epitaph. Nothing to indicate who they'd been or why they mattered. Forgotten, alone, lost to time. I understood the feeling. I waited until night. I couldn't risk someone seeing me dig. The cemetery officially closed at sunset, though the crooked gate couldn't really keep anyone out. At 3 a.m., I returned with my shovel and the LED flashlight I'd bought in Veracruz specifically for this purpose. The cemetery gate was locked now, a rusty chain looped through the bars, but the wall was low enough to climb. I threw my backpack over first, then pulled myself up and dropped into the cemetery grounds. The silence was immediate and absolute. No insects chirping, no night birds calling, not even the sound of waves from the ocean, though we were only a kilometer from the shore. Just my footsteps on dry earth and my own ragged breathing loud in the stillness. The temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees. My breath misted in the air, even though it was May on the coast, even though it should have been warm. Instead, I was freezing my teeth, chattering my hands numb as I gripped the shovel. The moon was full, casting everything in silver light that seemed to drain the color from the world. The shadows between the graves were absolute black, impenetrable, and I kept my flashlight pointed at the ground to avoid looking at them too closely. I made my way through the darkness to the forgotten section, to the nameless grave I'd chosen. I set down my backpack and began to dig. The earth was hard, packed full of rocks and roots from the trees that had been growing here for decades. My muscles burned with each shovelful. Sweat soaked through my shirt despite the cold running down my face and stinging my eyes. My hands, already blistered from the previous burial attempts, tore open and bled, but I didn't stop. Down I went deeper and deeper, throwing earth over my shoulder in a rhythm that became almost meditative. 1 meter down, 1.5. The hole grew darker as I descended, the moonlight not reaching the bottom. When I finally stopped standing in a hole 2 meters deep, I could barely see the stars above me. Just a circle of sky framed by earth impossibly distant. This was deep enough that no animal could dig it up. Deep enough that even if someone suspected something was buried here, they'd give up before reaching the bottom. Deep enough to hold it forever. I climbed out my muscles, screaming, and retrieved the clown from my backpack. This was it. The absolute last time I would ever touch this thing. The last time I would see that mime's face or feel that cold porcelain or hear those bells. I unwrapped it from the t-shirt I'd used for padding and held it one final time in the moonlight. The mime's face stared up at me, and as I watched, moisture appeared on the porcelain surface. Not condensation, the air was dry despite the coastal location. Tears, actual warm tears rolling down from the painted eyes, leaving wet trails on the white porcelain. I touched them with shaking fingers. They were real, body temperature. I brought my fingers to my lips without thinking. Salt, human tears. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the clown, my voice cracking. "But I can't let you destroy her, my aunt, my—" "She's all I have left, and you're killing her. I can't watch that happen." Then the bells started ringing, not the soft tinkling I'd heard before. This was violent, desperate, the bells clanging together like an alarm, like a scream made of metal. The sound echoed off the cemetery walls, impossibly loud in the dead silence, and I heard a voice. A girl's voice, young, maybe 8 or 9 years old, speaking Spanish with an accent from 40 years ago, the kind of accent old people have, formal and precise. "No me dejes. Por favor, estoy sola. He estado sola tanto tiempo. No me dejes otra vez. Don't leave me. Please, please, I'm alone. I've been alone for so long. Don't leave me again." The voice came from the clown, from the mime's mouth, even though the painted lips didn't move. It emanated from the porcelain like the doll was a speaker, the sound vibrating through the material, a child's voice, crying, begging, pleading not to be abandoned. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The voice continued, getting more desperate, more panicked. "Por favor, no me entierres en la oscuridad. Tengo miedo, tengo tanto miedo. No quiero estar sola otra vez." "Please don't bury me in the darkness. I'm scared. I'm so scared. I don't want to be alone again. I couldn't hold it anymore." I let it fall into the hole, tumbling down into the darkness, landing at the bottom with a soft thump against the damp earth. The voice stopped, immediately cutting off mid-word. The bells went silent. Just the sound of my heart hammering in my ears and my gasping breaths. I started shoveling dirt back into the hole, my movements frantic, desperate to finish this. Each scoop felt heavier than the last, the earth seeming to resist, to fight against being moved. Dirt rained down on the clown, covering the white porcelain, hiding it from view. As the earth covered it, I heard the bells again, faint now, muffled by soil. Ring, 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 getting quieter with each shovelful of dirt, 10 shovelfuls. The ringing grew fainter, like it was moving away, sinking deeper. 20 shovelfuls. The sound was barely audible, a whisper of bells. 30 shovelfuls. The ringing stopped. The silence that followed was crushing, heavy and total, pressing down on me like physical weight. I stood in the hole I dug up to my waist now in displaced earth and listened to nothing. No insects, no wind, not even the sound of the ocean, though I knew the waves were crashing on the shore just beyond the cemetery walls. It was as if the entire world had stopped holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I climbed out and finished filling the hole, my movements mechanical, now exhausted. I smoothed the earth over the grave, packed it down with the flat of the shovel, jumping on it to compress it further. Then I scattered leaves and twigs over it, arranged stones in a natural-looking pattern, did everything I could to make the ground look undisturbed. When I was finished, you couldn't tell anything had been buried there unless you knew exactly where to look and what to look for. I found a smooth stone nearby, about the size of my fist, and placed it on top as a marker. Using a sharp rock, I scratched a single word into its surface, the letters crude but readable: "Perdon, forgiveness." I didn't take a photo, didn't mark it on GPS. I wanted to forget this place, forget where I'd buried it, forget the sound of that child's voice begging not to be left alone in the darkness. As I climbed back over the cemetery wall, the old caretaker was standing in the shadow of his stone building. I could see the orange glow of a cigarette in the darkness, the tip brightening and dimming as he smoked. "Did you bury what you came to bury?" His voice drifted across the cemetery hollow and echoing. "Yes." "Will it stay buried?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I didn't know. I wanted to believe it would, but after everything I'd tried, I had no faith left. "The old ones say," the caretaker continued, his cigarette glowing brighter, "that some things don't want to rest. Some things have been alone for so long that they'll do anything not to be alone again, even if it means crawling out of the earth, even if it means following you to the ends of the earth." I felt ice in my veins. "What are you talking about?" "Nothing, senor. Just an old man's rambling. Sleep well." He dropped his cigarette and ground it out with his heel, then disappeared into his building. I ran to my rental car and drove away from that place as fast as the tiny engine would go. The bus ride back to Mexico City felt different, lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I slept the entire way, 10 hours of dreamless deep sleep, the first real rest I'd had in months. When I woke, we were pulling into the terminal. The sun was shining. People were going about their normal lives, buying street food, arguing on phones, laughing with friends. The world felt normal again, real. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. 3 weeks passed. I worked my shifts at the repair shop, eating regular meals for the first time in forever, actually tasting the food instead of just mechanically chewing and swallowing. I even went on a date with a girl named Sophia who'd brought her cracked phone screen to be fixed. She was nice. She laughed at my jokes. We made plans to see a movie the following weekend. My apartment's fluorescent light stopped flickering entirely. I'd replaced it with an LED bulb, and the steady white light felt like a blessing. My phone held its charge normally. The feeling of being watched evaporated like morning fog. Life was good. I'd done it. I'd finally succeeded. Monday of the third week, 11:30 p.m. I came home from work exhausted but satisfied after fixing a particularly tricky water-damaged laptop. I unlocked my apartment door and stepped inside. Before I even turned on the lights, I smelled it. Jasmine incense. The same scent my Aunt Rosa used in her house, so strong it made my eyes water. Sweet and cloying and absolutely unmistakable. But I lived alone. I didn't own incense. And my door had been locked. I turned on the lights, my hand shaking on the switch. Everything looked normal. Kitchen clean, the few dishes I owned drying in the rack. Living room undisturbed, the couch exactly as I'd left it. But the smell lingered, concentrated near the couch like someone had been burning incense there for hours. I searched everywhere. Under the furniture, in the closets, behind the shower curtain. Nothing. No source for the smell, no explanation. Tuesday, 2 a.m. I woke to bells, soft ringing from the living room, that familiar gentle rhythm I'd heard so many times before. Ring, 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 patient and persistent. I lay in bed paralyzed with fear, listening. My entire body was rigid, my breath shallow and quiet like I was trying not to be heard. The ringing continued. Ring, ring, ring. Finally, I got up and turned on every light in the apartment, flooding each room with harsh LED brightness. The ringing stopped the moment I entered the living room, cutting off mid-ring. On my coffee table was a wet rectangular mark, the exact size and shape of the clown's base. A circular impression where the body would sit with 4 small dots where the hands and feet would have rested. The wood was dark with moisture, the water still beading on the surface. And scattered around the wet mark were grains of dirt. But not the gray-brown soil from Mexico City. This dirt was different, rust-colored, sandy, the kind of coastal soil I'd seen in Veracruz. Some of the grains were still damp, recently disturbed, like they'd been shaken off something that had just been here. Wednesday evening, my phone rang. Aunt Rosa's name on the caller ID. My hand was shaking as I answered. Mateo. Her voice sounded tired, weak, defeated. I closed my eyes, already knowing what she was going to say. It came back. This morning, I found it on my porch when I went to water my plants. Mateo, I'm keeping it. Tia, no, please, let me come get it. I'll take it away again. Mateo, stop. Her voice was firm, more certain than I'd heard it in months. I've made my decision. I'm keeping it. We keep each other company now. It's killing you. Can't you see that you're wasting away? Maybe. But Mateo, listen to me. I've been alone for so long. Since your mother died, since the rest of the family left, I've been alone in this house with my clowns. And they're just objects. They can't talk, they can't listen, they can't understand, but this one is different. At night I talk to it, and I feel like someone's actually hearing me. Do you know how long it's been since I felt heard? That's not real, Tia. It's not actually listening, it's just a doll. Is it? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mateo, I don't care anymore. Real or not, it makes me feel less alone. That's worth something. That's worth a lot. Even if it's killing you. She was quiet for a long moment. Yes, even then. Loneliness kills too, Mateo, just slower. At least this way I have company for whatever time I have left. I wanted to argue, wanted to drive to Puebla right now and take that thing away from her by force. But I couldn't. She was an adult. She'd made her choice. And maybe in some terrible way she was right. Maybe dying with company was better than dying alone. Thursday night I couldn't stand not knowing how she was doing. I drove to Puebla without calling first, arriving around 9 p.m. When she answered the door, I almost didn't recognize her. She'd lost more weight. She couldn't have weighed more than 40 kilograms now, her clothes hanging off her frame like they were 2 sizes too large. Her face was skeletal, the skin stretched so tight over her bones that she looked like a skull wrapped in parchment. Her eyes had sunken deep into her head, ringed with dark circles so pronounced they looked like bruises. But it was her hands that frightened me most. They trembled constantly, even when she tried to hold them, still shaking like she had advanced Parkinson's. The skin was thin enough that I could see every vein, every tendon, the bones clearly visible beneath. She looked like she was dying, not eventually. Soon. The clown sat on the center shelf exactly where it had always been. And it looked different, healthier. The colors of the satin fabric were vibrant, practically glowing. The porcelain head had a sheen to it almost like skin instead of ceramic. The brass bells sparkled like they were brand new. It looked more alive than my aunt did. "Tia," I said, my voice breaking, "please, come with me. Come back to Mexico City. You can stay with me. We'll get you to a doctor. No, Mateo?" She smiled, and it was the saddest thing I'd ever seen. "It's too late for that. I made my choice. I'm at peace with it." "How can you be at peace with this? Look at yourself." "I am looking, and I see someone who's not alone anymore. That's enough." I stayed for dinner, though she barely ate anything, just pushed food around her plate while I forced down beans and rice that tasted like ash in my mouth. We watched television together, some mindless game show, neither of us really watching. The clown watched us both. I left around 11 p.m. knowing it might be the last time I saw my aunt alive. She hugged me at the door, and I could feel every bone in her body, could feel how light she was like a bird. "I love you, Mateo," she whispered. "Don't blame yourself for any of this. You were just trying to help. This isn't your fault." But it was. I'd brought that thing into her house. I'd started all of this. I drove home with tears streaming down my face, unable to stop them. That night I slept on her couch. I told her I was too tired to drive, but really I couldn't leave her alone with that thing. Some part of me hoped that my presence might protect her, might slow down whatever was happening. I was wrong. At 11:45 p.m. I was lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. That's when I heard my aunt's voice from her bedroom. She was talking to someone, her voice soft and affectionate. "I know you're lonely. I know. I am too. We're the same, you and I. Both of us forgotten, both of us left behind." Then another voice answered, high-pitched, young, female, the same voice I'd heard in the cemetery. "Thank you for keeping me. Thank you for not throwing me away." My blood ran cold. I sat up slowly, trying not to make any noise. The voices continued a conversation between my aunt and something that should not be able to speak. I crept to her bedroom door. It was open a few centimeters, enough to see inside. My aunt sat on her bed in her nightgown, holding the clown like a child. She was stroking its fabric head, running her fingers over the satin, whispering to it. "I won't throw you away. I promise. We'll stay together, both of us, until the end." As I watched through the gap in the door, the clown's head began to turn, slowly, mechanically rotating on its neck, even though my aunt's hands weren't moving it. The porcelain moved with a faint grinding sound like stone on stone. The head rotated from the colorful clown face toward the mime face, slowly, inexorably, like the hour hand on a clock. The mime face came into view, and its eyes opened. They weren't painted anymore. They were real eyes, human eyes, brown and wet and alive with pupils that contracted and dilated in the lamplight. Real eyelashes. Real whites with tiny red veins visible in them. Human eyes set in a porcelain face, blinking slowly, focusing on my aunt, with an expression of desperate longing and terrible bottomless need. Then the mime's mouth moved. The painted lips stretched and shifted, becoming flexible like real flesh, skin instead of paint. The mouth opened, and I could see darkness inside and something that might have been a tongue. The lips formed words. Gracias, Rosa, por fin tengo un hogar. Thank you, Rosa. I finally have a home. The voice came from that mouth, from the clown itself, spoken in the voice of a little girl who'd been dead for 40 years. My aunt smiled, tears running down her face. You're welcome, pequeña. You're welcome. I must have made a sound, a gasp, a whimper, something, because the clown's eyes snapped toward the door, toward me. Those living human eyes locked onto mine through the gap, and the mouth smiled. Not a painted smile. A real smile, lips pulling back to reveal darkness inside and the suggestion of teeth. Hola, Mateo, it said, the little girl's voice, now edged with something else, something older, colder. Thank you for bringing me home. I stumbled backward from the door, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. Behind me I heard footsteps, small footsteps, the clicking of porcelain feet on tile floor like hard shoes on hard ground, and bells. Ring, 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 getting closer, each step marked by that gentle metallic chiming. I ran, grabbed my keys from the coffee table with shaking hands, my wallet from my jacket pocket. Everything I needed to get out, to get away, to never come back. Behind me, the footsteps continued. Click, 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 ring, ring, ring. I looked back once, just once, before I reached the door. The clown was standing in the hallway. Standing upright on its own, its fabric legs somehow supporting its weight, its porcelain feet clicking on the floor with each step. The mime face was fully visible now, and those human eyes tracked me as I moved. It raised one fabric arm, the hand moving in a gesture that might have been a wave or might have been reaching for me. Don't go, Mateo. Stay with us. We can all be together, a family again. I fled through the front door and ran to my car, my hands shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before I could get them in the ignition. The streetlights flickered and died as I started the engine, plunging the entire block into darkness. From inside the house I could hear the bells still ringing. And then, cutting through the night, a child's voice calling after me, desperate and pleading. No te vayas, Mateo, por favor, no nos dejes solas. Don't go, Mateo, please don't leave us alone. I drove. I didn't stop at red lights, didn't stop for stop signs, didn't stop until I was 50 kilometers from Puebla, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, my entire body shaking. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I half expected to see a small figure sitting in the back seat, those human eyes watching me, that mouth smiling. But the back seat remained empty. When I finally stumbled into my apartment as the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I collapsed on my floor and cried, not from fear anymore, from helplessness, from the knowledge that my aunt was lost, that whatever that thing was, it had her now, and she had gone willingly. The next month was torture. I called my aunt every day, listening to her voice grow weaker, monitoring the progression of whatever was happening to her. Week 1. I'm fine, Mateo, really. It's very gentle with me. We talk for hours. Week 2. I have to hold it when I sleep now. If I put it down, I hear crying all night. Such terrible crying. I can't stand to hear it cry. Week 3. If I try to leave the house, I feel sick, dizzy. My heart races and I can't breathe. It's better if I just stay here, safer. Week 4. I'm so tired, Mateo. So very tired, but I can't let it go. It needs me. It's been alone for so long. I'm all it has. Her voice on that last call was barely above a whisper, each word an effort. Monday, July 15th, 6:07 a.m. I was at work replacing a battery in a customer's phone when my own phone rang. Unknown number. Is this Senor Mateo Ruiz? Yes. Who is this? This is Dr. Santos from Hospital General de Puebla. I'm calling about Rosa Castellano. She was brought in by ambulance early this morning. I'm very sorry to inform you that she passed away at 4:23 a.m. The phone I was holding slipped from my hands and shattered on the concrete floor. The customer jumped back as pieces of glass scattered across the workspace. What happened? My voice didn't sound like my own. Distant. Hollow. The official cause of death is cardiac arrest, but Senor Ruiz, when we examined her, she was severely malnourished, dehydrated. It's as if all the energy, all the life had been drained from her body. She weighed 38 kilograms when she was brought in. For a woman her height, that's dangerously underweight. Frankly, I'm surprised her heart held out as long as it did. 38 kilograms. 83 pounds. She'd weighed at least 55 kilograms when I'd last seen her healthy before all this started. The thing had consumed her, literally drained the life from her over the course of barely a month. Was anyone with her when she died? A neighbor heard her phone ringing for hours and became concerned. They found her in her bedroom. She was holding a photograph, old from the looks of it. Family photo, maybe. And there was a doll on the bed beside her. The neighbor said your aunt had been talking to it, treating it like it was alive. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Senor Ruiz, are you still there? Yes, I'll be there to handle the arrangements. I hung up, told Don Miguel I had a family emergency, drove to Puebla in a daze, the world outside my car window blurry and unreal. Tuesday afternoon, I arrived at my aunt's house. The neighbor who'd called the ambulance, Senora Ortiz, an elderly woman who'd lived next door for 30 years, met me at the door. Her face was pale, her hands clutching a rosary. I'm so sorry for your loss, Mateo. Your aunt was a good woman, but that last month, something wasn't right. I could hear her talking at all hours, laughing sometimes, crying others, and always that voice answering her, that child's voice. But there were no children in the house. I thanked her and went inside. The house felt different, lighter. The oppressive weight that had hung in the air for the past month was gone, as if something that had been there, something heavy and hungry and ancient, had finally left, or finished what it came to do. My aunt's bedroom door was open. The bed was made with hospital corners, the sheets crisp and white. On the pillow lay a photograph in a wooden frame. I picked it up with trembling hands. It showed two little girls, maybe 9 years old, standing in front of a carnival tent. The photo was old, the colors faded to sepia and washed-out blues. The girls wore matching white dresses with ribbons in their hair. Their faces were serious the way children's faces were in old photographs before people learned to smile for cameras. Each girl held a clown doll. The dolls were identical, two-faced, with a colorful clown on one side and a mime on the other. The same style, the same size, twins. I turned the photograph over. Written on the back in faded ink, the handwriting old-fashioned and careful, Rosa and Esperanza, last day before the family separated. Twin clown dolls, a gift from Abuelo Roberto. He said they will always find each other. No matter how far apart you are, they will bring you back together. March 15, 1984. Twin dolls. Not one, but two. Made as a pair meant to be together. Given to cousins Rosa and Esperanza, who would be separated when their families divorced. The dolls had been apart for 40 years, passed from owner to owner, lost and found and lost again. And all that time they'd been trying to reunite. When Esperanza died in 2018, her doll came looking for Rosa, the last person who'd loved it, the last connection to its twin. And now Rosa was dead too, which meant... I searched the house frantically, my heart racing, every room, every closet, every drawer, under the bed, behind the furniture, in the attic crawl space. The clown was gone. It had vanished the same day my aunt died, leaving no trace except the photograph and the memories. On my aunt's nightstand, tucked under the lamp, I found her diary, a leather-bound notebook where she'd written her thoughts in cramped, increasingly shaky handwriting. I flipped to the last entry, dated July 14, 2024, the day before she died. It's taking me. I can feel it. Every night a little more of my life flows out of me and into it. The clown is changing, growing warmer, more alive. Its eyes open sometimes when we talk. Real eyes, not painted ones. Its mouth moves. It speaks to me in a little girl's voice, calls me Tia like Mateo does. It tells me about being alone, about being passed from hand to hand, owner to owner, never staying anywhere long, always searching for its twin. Always searching for home, I thought I could help it. I thought if I just loved it enough, if I gave it the home it was searching for, it would be satisfied. I was wrong. This loneliness is bottomless, an abyss. It will never be filled, never be satisfied. It just takes and takes and takes until there's nothing left to give. But I can't stop. The crying is unbearable when I try to put it down. It sounds so much like a real child, so desperate and afraid. I can't stand to hear it cry. Mateo, if you read this, and I know you will because you're good that way, you always clean up my messes, please understand. Don't keep it. Don't throw it away. Those are the two things that make it angry, make it desperate. You have to accept it exists, but don't embrace it. Don't love it. Don't let it close to your heart. Keep it in your life at arm's length. Acknowledge it. Speak to it if you must, but never ever give it what it wants most, your love, your warmth, your life force. If you do, you'll die like I'm dying now. I didn't know how to keep that distance. The loneliness in me called to the loneliness in it, and we couldn't help but merge. Maybe you're stronger than I am. Maybe you can survive what I couldn't. I'm sorry, Mateo. Sorry for leaving you alone. Sorry for not being stronger. Sorry for not listening when you tried to warn me. Take care of yourself, mijo. And if it finds you when it finds you, because I know it will remember what I said. Accept but don't embrace. Acknowledge but don't love. Keep it close but not too close. That's the only way to survive. I love you. I'm sorry, Tia Rosa. The diary fell from my hands, landing on the floor with a soft thud. My vision blurred with tears. She'd known. She'd understood what was happening but couldn't stop it. The clown's loneliness had been a mirror to her own, and the two had been drawn together like magnets, unable to resist the pull. And now she was gone, consumed. Drained dry by something that wore the face of childhood innocence, but was really just hunger given form. I left Puebla that afternoon, unable to stay in that house another minute. I didn't go back to Mexico City. Instead, I drove west, putting distance between myself and everything that had happened. And somewhere in some unknown place, the clown waited. Free again, searching for me. I ran from those clowns 600 miles. I changed my phone number. I moved to a new city. But 3 weeks ago, when I opened my hotel room door in Guadalajara, both of them were lying on my bed. And I'm starting to understand I will never escape. 2 weeks after my Aunt Rosa's funeral, I fled to Guadalajara. It was the farthest I could afford to go without leaving Mexico entirely. And some part of me thought that distance measured in cities instead of kilometers might make a difference. It didn't. I checked into the cheapest hotel I could find, a concrete block on the edge of the industrial district where they rented rooms by the week and didn't ask questions as long as you paid cash. The room was small, barely larger than a prison cell. A bed with sheets that smelled like industrial bleach. A sink with rust stains. A shared bathroom down the hall. A single window that looked out onto a concrete wall 10 feet away. It was depressing. It was perfect. It was anonymous. I found work at a small electronics repair shop 2 blocks from the hotel, working under the table for a man named Hector who paid minimum wage and didn't care that I had no references, no employment history I was willing to share. I fixed phones and tablets and laptops, losing myself in the mechanical simplicity of it. Circuit boards didn't lie. Solder joints either worked or they didn't. There was comfort in that certainty. For 3 days, I almost believed I'd succeeded. I worked 12-hour shifts, came back to my hotel room exhausted, ate street tacos from the vendor on the corner, and slept with the lights on. I checked under the bed every night before lying down. I locked the door 3 times, the main lock, the deadbolt, and a chain I'd installed myself. No bells, no jasmine scent, no small figures and mirrors. Just the normal sounds of a cheap hotel plumbing that groaned neighbors arguing through thin walls, traffic from the street below. Then Friday night arrived. I came back from my shift around 11 p.m., my hands still smelling like soldering flux and cleaning alcohol. I climbed the stairs to the third floor. The elevator had been broken since I'd arrived, and the owner showed no signs of fixing it. The hallway was dim, only every other bulb working, casting pools of yellow light separated by stretches of shadow. My door was closed, locked as I'd left it. The chain was still in place. I could see it through the gap. But something felt wrong. The air was different, heavier, like the atmospheric pressure had changed. I stood outside my door for a full minute, key in hand, trying to identify what had changed. My hands were shaking. My heart rate accelerated for no reason I could name. Then I smelled it. Jasmine. That sweet, cloying scent that I'd come to associate with my aunt's house, with death, with things that shouldn't be alive but were. My hand shook as I unlocked the door. The hinges creaked. They always creaked. The hotel was too cheap to maintain anything properly. I reached for the light switch but paused before flipping it, some instinct making me want to see what was in the darkness first. In the dim light filtering through the window from the street lamp outside, I saw them. Both clowns sat on my bed, propped against the pillow like children waiting for a bedtime story, their mime faces pointed toward the door, toward me. In the darkness, I couldn't tell if the eyes were painted or real, but I felt them watching me, tracking my movement as I stood frozen in the doorway. I turned on the light. The clowns looked ordinary again under the harsh bulb. Lifeless porcelain and faded fabric. Just objects, just dolls. But they were here. In a room I'd rented under a false name. I'd told the hotel owner I was Miguel Sandoval, in a city I'd chosen at random from a map, in a building I'd never mentioned to anyone. On the nightstand beside the bed sat something new. A small wooden box, old and ornate, with brass hinges that had tarnished to green. Carved into the lid were flowers and vines, the kind of decorative work you don't see anymore when craftsmen took pride in details no one would notice. Written on top in fresh black marker, the ink still slightly wet, Para Mateo. For Mateo, not Miguel Sandoval. Mateo, my real name. The name I hadn't told anyone in this city. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, walk out that door, leave everything behind, and just keep walking until I couldn't walk anymore. But I was tired, so tired. Tired of running, tired of being afraid, tired of pretending this wasn't happening. And part of me, the part that had grown up hearing my aunt's stories, the part that had seen too much to deny anymore, knew that running wouldn't matter. They would find me again. They always found me. I walked to the nightstand and opened the box. Inside, nestled in red velvet that had faded to pink with age, was a photograph. Old, the colors faded to sepias and washed-out blues, the edges yellowed and brittle. It showed 3 little girls standing in front of a carousel, the painted horses frozen mid-gallop behind them. They wore matching white dresses with lace collars and ribbons in their hair. They looked about 9 years old, their faces serious in that way children's faces were in photographs from decades past. Each held a clown doll, 3 dolls, 3 girls. I recognized 2 of them immediately, younger versions of Aunt Rosa and Esperanza, her cousin. Their faces still unformed, still innocent of the divorces and separations that would come. But the 3rd girl was unfamiliar to me. She stood slightly apart from the others, her smile uncertain, her eyes not quite meeting the camera. And the clown she held looked newer than the others, its colors brighter, its fabric less worn. I turned the photograph over with trembling hands. The inscription on the back was written in careful, old-fashioned handwriting that belonged to someone who'd learned to write with fountain pens. Rosa, Esperanza, and Elena, the 3 cousins. 3 dolls from Abuelo Roberto, one set never to be separated. December 1983. If you keep them apart, Abuelo said, they will suffer, they will search, they will do whatever they must to be together again, and they will take what they need to survive the loneliness. God forgive me for making them. I thought I was creating companions for my granddaughters. I didn't know what I was putting into them. I didn't know porcelain and fabric could hold such things. Roberto Castellano, Elena. My mother's name was Elena. I sat down on the bed, the photograph trembling in my hands, the world tilting around me. My mother. She'd been one of the 3 cousins. She'd owned the 3rd doll. My mother, who'd left her family at 18 and never looked back, who refused to talk about her childhood, who burned any photographs from before she left Puebla, who died of cancer when I was 12, taking all her secrets to the grave. She'd been running from this, from them, her entire life, and now they'd found me. The 2 clowns beside me seemed to lean closer, though I didn't see them move. The temperature in the room dropped, my breath misting in air that had been sweltering moments before. I looked at the clowns, really looked at them for the first time since entering the room. They sat perfectly still, but there was something different about them now. An anticipation. A waiting quality. Saturday morning, 3 a.m. I woke because someone was crying. A child's voice, muffled and distant sobbing, with the kind of heartbroken desperation that makes your chest ache even when you don't know the reason. The sound came from the wooden box on the nightstand. I got up, my body moving on autopilot, and opened the box. The photograph was gone. In its place was a letter written on paper so old it was nearly transparent, the ink faded to brown. The handwriting was different from the inscription on the photograph. Shakier, more desperate. I recognized it even though I'd only seen it a handful of times in birthday cards she'd sent before she got too sick to write. My mother's handwriting. Mateo, you don't know me, not really. I made sure of that. I left before you were old enough to remember, and I never told you about my family, my childhood, the thing I was running from. If you're reading this, the dolls have found you. I'm sorry. I tried to protect you. I tried to destroy mine when I was 16, tried to break the cycle. I burned it. I buried it in the woods. I threw it into the ocean off Veracruz. It always came back. So I ran. I left Puebla, left my family, left everyone I loved because I knew what the dolls would do if I stayed. They don't just want to be together. They feed on family, on blood connection, on the loneliness that runs in our veins like a genetic disease passed down from my grandfather to his children to his grandchildren. When you were born, Mateo, my doll came back. I'd been free of it for almost 10 years, thought maybe it had finally given up. But 3 days after you were born, I found it in your nursery. It was standing over your crib, actually standing on its own, balanced on those tiny porcelain feet. It was looking down at you with those painted eyes that weren't quite painted anymore. And I knew it wasn't hunting me anymore. It was waiting for you to grow up, waiting for you to inherit the loneliness that runs in our blood. I tried to protect you. I hid the doll in a place I thought it could never escape, a storage unit in another city, locked in a safe, buried under concrete blocks. I paid the rent for 50 years in advance, but I was dying, Mateo. Cancer. The doctor said I had 6 months. I knew when I died it would be free. The lock would break. The concrete would crack. It would find its way out. I should have warned you. Should have told you about the family curse, about your great-grandfather Roberto, and the dolls he made, about the 3 cousins who were separated, and the 3 dolls that refused to accept that separation. But I hoped that if you didn't know, maybe it would pass over you. Maybe ignorance would be protection. I was wrong. I'm sorry. By the time you read this, all 3 dolls will have found each other, and they will never let you go. They've been apart for 40 years, and that loneliness has made them strong, hungry, desperate. There is no escape, Mateo. I learned that. Your Aunt Rosa learned that. Now you must learn it too. But there is survival. Listen carefully. The dolls don't want to hurt you. They want to be acknowledged, to be seen, to not be alone. Don't throw them away. It makes them desperate. Don't try to destroy them. It makes them angry. Don't embrace them. It makes them consume you. You must find the balance. Keep them in your life, but at a distance. Acknowledge their existence without loving them. Let them be present without letting them be close. I never learned how to do that. The loneliness in me was too strong. It called to the loneliness in the doll, and we couldn't help but merge. Maybe you're stronger than I was. Maybe you can survive what I couldn't. I love you, mijo. I'm sorry I left you to face this alone. I'm sorry I wasn't the mother you deserved. I'm sorry for so many things, but most of all, I'm sorry for the loneliness you inherited from me. It's in your blood, in your bones, in the empty spaces of your heart. The dolls can sense it. That's why they'll never leave you. Be careful, be strong, and whatever you do, don't let them fill the empty spaces inside you. That's how they win. Your mother, Elena Castellano Ruiz. The letter dissolved in my hands as I finished reading it. The ink ran like tears, the paper crumbling to dust that smelled like jasmine and age and secrets kept too long. Within seconds there was nothing left but powder on my palms, fine as flour. I looked at the two clowns on my bed. They sat motionless, watching me with faces that might have been painted or might have been real depending on how the light hit them. And I understood finally what I was dealing with. Not cursed objects, not evil spirits. Something older and stranger than that. Vessels for loneliness itself. 3 dolls made by a craftsman who'd put too much of himself into his work, who'd somehow captured the essence of isolation and need and the desperate human hunger for connection. When the 3 cousins were separated by their families' divorces, the dolls absorbed their pain. 40 years of searching for each other. 40 years of loneliness, growing stronger, more concentrated, more hungry. And all that time waiting for family to find, waiting for someone whose blood called to them, waiting for me. Saturday afternoon, I went to the public library. I needed to understand what I was dealing with, needed to know more about my great-grandfather, Roberto Castellano. In the newspaper archives, I found articles about him from the 1960s and 70s. He'd been a toy maker in Puebla, famous locally for his porcelain dolls. Each one handcrafted, unique, imbued with what the articles called uncommon artistry and disturbing realism. But I also found something else. A small article from March 1984, just a paragraph buried in the local news section. Renowned toy maker Roberto Castellano, 67, was found dead in his workshop yesterday. Cause of death appears to be self-inflicted. In a note left behind, Castellano wrote, "I put too much of myself into them. I didn't know what would happen when they were separated. God forgive me. I made vessels and loneliness filled them." Police found 3 partially completed dolls in his workshop, all identical, all with 2 faces. The dolls were destroyed at the family's request. So there had been 6 dolls originally, 3 completed ones given to the cousins in 1983. 3 partial ones destroyed after my great-grandfather's death in 1984. The 3 completed ones had been searching for each other ever since. Sunday night, I returned to my hotel room. Both clowns were exactly where I'd left them on the bed, but the wooden box was open again. Inside was another photograph, one I'd never seen before. 5 little girls. 5 dolls. My blood turned to ice. I looked closer at the photo. Rosa and Esperanza I recognized. Elena, my mother, was there too, younger than in the other photo, maybe 7 instead of 9. But there were 2 other girls I didn't know. One looked about 6 with dark curly hair. The other was maybe 10 with serious eyes and a stern expression. On the back, the 5 Castellano granddaughters, 1981, Rosa, Esperanza, Elena, Mariana, and Sofia. 5 dolls from Abuelo. He said they were practice for his masterwork. These were his first attempts. They didn't turn out right, he said. Too unstable. He locked them away. 5 dolls, not 3. 5. And if 3 had survived, if 3 were here with me now, where were the other 2? Monday, 3 p.m. I returned to the hotel after my shift to find my door unlocked. Not broken into, the lock still worked fine. Just unlocked as if I'd forgotten to lock it, even though I remembered clearly hearing the deadbolt click that morning. I opened the door slowly, my heart hammering. The smell of jasmine hit me immediately, so strong it made my eyes water. I reached for the light switch. On the bed, lying on the cheap floral bedspread, were the 2 clowns. The mime faces looked up at the ceiling, the hands folded across their chests like corpses laid out for viewing. Beside them lay 3 objects arranged in a neat row. My key card, the one that should have been in my pocket. My Aunt Rosa's diary, the one I'd left in Puebla, locked in her house. The photograph of the 5 girls, the one that had been in the wooden box this morning. I picked up the photograph with shaking hands and turned it over. The inscription was the same, but now there was new writing below it in fresh ink that smudged when I touched it. 5 dolls, 5 cousins. 3 are together now. 2 are still searching. And they know where you are, Mateo. They're coming. They've been alone the longest. They're the angriest. They're almost here. As I stood there frozen, I heard the sound of bells. Not from the clowns on the bed, from the hallway outside my door. Coming closer. Ring, 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 ring. 2 sets of bells chiming in harmony, getting louder with each step. A knock at my door, soft, polite. 3 deliberate raps. I stood paralyzed, unable to move, unable to breathe. The knock came again, then a voice. Young, male, pleasant. Delivery for Mateo Ruiz. Package requiring signature. My legs moved without my permission, carrying me to the door. My hand reached for the handle. Some part of me knew I shouldn't open it. Knew that whatever was on the other side wasn't a delivery person, wasn't human, but I opened it anyway. A young man stood there, maybe 20 years old, wearing a courier uniform from a company I didn't recognize. He held out a cardboard box, medium-sized, taped shut. Package for you, senor. No return address. Cash payment. Just need your signature. His smile was too wide. His eyes didn't blink. When I looked at his hands holding the box, I noticed his fingers didn't bend quite right, the joints angling in ways that human fingers shouldn't. I took the box. It was light, almost weightless. The young man walked away without another word, his footsteps making no sound on the tile floor. I closed the door and set the box on the desk, my hands trembling so badly I could barely grip it. I already knew what was inside. Part of me had known from the moment I'd heard those bells. I opened the box. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper like a gift, was the 3rd clown. Identical to the first 2 in construction, porcelain head, satin body, brass bells, but different in crucial ways. The fabric was rotted, falling apart in places, revealing the wooden armature beneath like exposed bones. The porcelain head was cracked, spider-webbed with fractures that looked like they'd spread from a central impact point. The paint was faded almost to nothing, the colors bleached by time and neglect. And it smelled. Not jasmine, decay, mold. The smell of things left in darkness for too long, forgotten and unloved. This doll had been alone much longer than the others, hidden away by my mother for decades, locked in that storage unit buried under concrete, waiting in darkness, while the other 2 had at least been passed from hand to hand, seen daylight, known brief moments of being wanted. This one had known only abandonment. There was a letter beneath it, tucked under the tissue paper. My Aunt Rosa's handwriting again, but this letter was different from the one in her diary. This had been written earlier, before she'd started keeping the clown, before it had started draining her. Mateo, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. And I'm sorry. There were always 2 clowns here in Puebla, mine and Esperanza's. When Esperanza died in 2018, her clown found me. I thought that was the end of it. I thought if I just kept them both, gave them the home they were searching for, they'd be satisfied. But there was always a 3rd. Elena's clown. Your mother's. She told me once years ago when we still spoke that she'd locked it away, that she'd found a way to contain it. I didn't believe her. I thought she was being paranoid, that her cancer had made her imagine things. I was wrong. 2 weeks ago, I started having dreams. Dreams of a 3rd clown, smaller than the others, trapped in darkness, screaming to be let out. Dreams of it clawing at concrete, breaking through locks, desperate to reunite with its siblings. The 2 clowns I have, they talk to me now, Mateo. In the night they whisper with voices like children. They tell me about their sister, about how she's been alone for so long, locked away in the dark, how the loneliness has changed her, made her angry, made her unstable. They tell me she's free now, that Elena's death broke the last lock holding her, and she's coming. Not for me. I'll be dead by the time she arrives. She's coming for you, Mateo, because you're family, because you're the last one, because the loneliness in our blood calls to them like a beacon. When she finds you and all three are together, you must be careful. The first two have had time to adapt, to learn patience, but the third has had only darkness and abandonment. She won't be gentle. She won't be patient. You have to make a choice, accept all three or reject all three. There's no middle ground with the third doll. She's too damaged, too desperate. If you try to keep some and reject others, they'll tear you apart, fighting over you. Accept them all, acknowledge them all, and maintain distance from all. That's the only way. I'm sorry I won't be there to help you. I'm sorry for leaving you alone with this. But know that I love you. I've always loved you since you were a child. You were the son I never had. And I'm sorry I'm leaving you to face this horror alone. Be strong, Mateo. Stronger than I was. Tia Rosa. I walked to the bed where the first two clowns sat. I picked up the third clown from the box, handling it carefully despite my revulsion, and placed it between the other two. Now they sat in a row. 3 dolls, 3 faces of loneliness. 3 pieces of my great-grandfather's soul. The temperature in the room plummeted, my breath misted. Frost formed on the inside of the window, spreading in patterns that looked almost like words, almost like warnings. All 3 clowns' heads turned, slowly, mechanically rotating from the clown faces to the mime faces. The grinding sound of porcelain on wood filled the room like bones breaking, like the world cracking open. The mime faces came into view, and all 6 eyes opened, not painted, real, human eyes set in porcelain faces. The first 2 had brown eyes, warm and sad and desperate, but the third had yellow eyes, roomy and sick-looking with pupils that were too dilated, too wide, reflecting light like an animal's eyes in darkness. Eyes that had seen nothing but darkness for decades. Eyes that had gone mad from isolation. All 3 mouths opened. The painted lips became flexible, became skin, became real, and they spoke, their voices overlapping into a chorus. Mateo. The first 2 spoke with the voices of young girls, gentle and pleading. But the third's voice was different, raspy, damaged, like vocal cords that had screamed too long in silence. "We've been waiting," the first said. "For so long," the second added. "Too long," the third hissed, her voice sharp enough to hurt. I backed toward the door, my hands fumbling behind me for the handle. The 3 dolls didn't move from the bed, but I felt their attention on me, focused and hungry and inescapable. "Don't run," the first pleaded. "Please don't run. We're not going to hurt you." "We just want to stay," the second whispered. "We just want a home." "We just want you," the third snarled. And then, moving with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for objects made of porcelain and fabric, all 3 dolls lunged forward. I yanked open the door and ran, hearing their bells chiming behind me. Ring, 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 a discordant symphony of desperation. I made it to the stairs before I heard the first one land behind me. The sound of porcelain feet hitting tile, click, 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 impossibly loud in the empty hallway. I ran down 3 flights of stairs, my breath burning in my lungs, my heart hammering against my ribs. Behind me, the clicking continued, sometimes 1 set of feet, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, the sounds overlapping and separating. I burst out of the hotel's back exit into an alley, the afternoon sun blinding after the dim interior. I ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran. 2 blocks, 3, 4, my lungs screamed, my legs burned, and still I heard them behind me, those bells ringing, those feet clicking, growing closer no matter how fast I ran. Finally, my body gave out. I collapsed in an alley behind a restaurant, gasping for breath, my vision swimming with black spots. The bells stopped. I looked up, expecting to see 3 dolls standing over me, those living eyes watching me with hunger. But the alley was empty. Just trash bins and puddles and the smell of rotting food. No dolls, no bells, no clicking footsteps. I sat there for an hour, waiting for my heart rate to return to normal, waiting for my hands to stop shaking, trying to understand what had just happened. They'd chased me, actually chased me through the streets like living things, and then stopped. Why? As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, I understood. They weren't trying to catch me. They were hurting me, driving me away from the hotel, away from my few possessions, away from any sense of stability or safety, making me dependent on them, making me come back. I spent that night in a 24-hour cafe drinking coffee and watching the door, waiting for three small figures to walk in with bells chiming and eyes that weren't quite painted anymore. They never came. The next morning, exhausted and desperate, I returned to the hotel. I had nowhere else to go, no money for a new room, no possessions except what I was wearing. I climbed the stairs slowly, my legs heavy with dread. I stood outside my door for 5 minutes before I could bring myself to touch the handle. The door was unlocked. I opened it slowly. The room looked exactly as I'd left it. Bed made, window closed, everything neat and orderly. The three dolls sat on the desk, arranged in a neat row, the mime faces turned toward the door, toward me. All 6 eyes closed now, all 3 mouths shut, just painted porcelain again. But on the bed spread out like offerings were all my possessions. My clothes neatly folded, my phone fully charged, my wallet with all my money still inside, my identification documents, everything I'd left behind when I ran. And in the center of the bed, a single piece of paper with writing in 3 different hands, one neat and careful, one shaky but legible, one barely controlled scrawl. We don't want you to run. We don't want to scare you. We just want to exist near you. Please, we've been alone for so long. Don't make us be alone again. I stood in the doorway for a long time, looking at the dolls, at my possessions, at the note. And I made my choice. Not acceptance, not rejection, something in between. Okay, I said to the empty room, to the 3 dolls watching me with closed eyes that might open at any moment. You can stay, but there are rules. The temperature in the room changed, warming slightly, a sense of attention, of listening. You don't touch me. You don't move when I'm looking at you. You don't speak unless I speak to you first. And you stay on that desk. You don't follow me around. You don't get in my bed. You don't... One of the dolls, the first I thought, though it was hard to tell, fell over sideways with a soft thump. Like a child nodding off to sleep. Agreement. I stepped into the room and closed the door behind me. That was 3 months ago. I still live in that hotel room in Guadalajara. I still work at Hector's repair shop. The 3 dolls sit on my desk arranged in a row, the mime faces usually turned toward the wall. Usually. Sometimes I wake up and find them looking at me, those eyes open and watching. I turn them back around without a word. They accept it. They move at night. I hear them walking on their porcelain feet, bells tinkling softly, whispering to each other in voices too quiet for me to make out words. But they don't touch me. They keep their distance as agreed, most of the time. I can't form relationships anymore. When I try, when I talk too long with a coworker, when a customer seems interested in more than just getting their phone fixed, the dolls interfere. Objects move. Electronics malfunction. People hear whispers in empty rooms. They're jealous. They want me isolated, dependent on them, alone with only them for company. So I am alone. I'm 26 years old and I look 40. Gray hair at my temples that wasn't there 3 months ago. Lines around my eyes from stress and poor sleep. My hands shake sometimes, especially in the morning, especially when I wake up and see 3 small figures sitting on my desk, watching me. The loneliness is worse than it's ever been. It sits in my chest like a physical weight, making it hard to breathe sometimes. The kind of loneliness that makes you understand why people do desperate things, why they accept situations they shouldn't, why they choose bad company over no company at all. The dolls know. They can sense it. That's why they're patient now. They don't have to chase me anymore. The loneliness will drive me to them eventually. It's only a matter of time. Last night I made the mistake of picking one up. The first one, the one that was my Aunt Rosa's. I don't know why. Maybe I was drunk. I've started drinking more lately, cheap tequila from the corner store. Maybe I was just so desperately lonely that even a possessed doll seemed like companionship. I held it in my lap, running my fingers over the satin fabric, feeling the cold porcelain head. And it felt good, comforting, like being less alone. That's when I knew I was in trouble. That's when I understood that my Aunt Rosa hadn't been weak. She'd been human, and human beings aren't meant to be alone forever. This morning, I woke up with all 3 dolls in bed with me, one on each side, one at my feet. I don't remember putting them there. I moved them back to the desk without comment. But tonight, when I'm lying in the dark listening to the city sounds through my thin walls, I know I'll be tempted to bring them back, to hold them, to let them fill the empty spaces inside me. That's how they win, not through fear, through loneliness, through the desperate human need for connection, even if that connection is with things that will eventually drain us dry. I understand now why my mother ran, why my Aunt Rosa accepted them. Why I'm sitting here in this hotel room writing this down while 3 dolls sit on my desk and watch me with eyes that shift between painted and real depending on how the light hits them. Because loneliness is a kind of death too, just slower, just quieter, just as inevitable. And if you have to choose between dying alone or dying in company, even if that company is 3 porcelain dolls filled with 40 years of accumulated desperation and need, well, maybe that's not such an easy choice after all. The bells are ringing softly now, all 3 sets chiming in gentle harmony. They know I'm thinking about them. They know I'm weakening. Tomorrow I'll be strong again. Tomorrow I'll maintain my distance, keep them on the desk, follow the rules I set. Tomorrow. But tonight in the darkness, the loneliness is crushing, and 3 small voices whisper from across the room, "We're here, Mateo. We'll always be here. You never have to be alone again." And God help me, that sounds less like a threat and more like a promise, a comfort, a home. The bells ring. I close my eyes, and when I open them again, the dolls are closer, always closer. One day soon they'll be close enough, and I don't think I'll push them away.